My name is Melissa, and I've been married to Cedric for nearly a decade. We're both in our 40s and don't have children. We live together in a cozy home, with Cedric working a standard white-collar job while I manage a part-time position. Thanks to our combined incomes, we enjoy a comfortable financial cushion. Our marriage has been smooth sailing so far, with hardly any major disagreements. Lately, however, things have become a bit more complicated. The change began when I inherited a condo from my father, who recently passed away. I've been advised to move into this new condo and relinquish my childhood home. My father had purchased the two-bedroom condo for himself when we got married. It's not overly large, but it's charming and stylish. The condo Cedric and I currently call home is actually my childhood residence. My parents and I lived in a 4-bedroom condo until I married, at which point my father gifted it to me. After leaving for college, returning to this home filled with memories was a source of great joy. My mother passed away while I was in college, so my father lived alone in the family home. When Cedric and I were preparing to marry, my father expressed his hope that we would be comfortable in the condo. I initially thought he was hinting at moving in with us, but he firmly declined. He likely didn't want to intrude on our new life together. After my father passed away, I inherited the 2-bedroom condo where he had been living. Luckily, I was able to quickly find a tenant and secure a lease. I assumed our lives would continue as they had before. However, a year later, my mother-in-law made an unexpected proposal during a visit. She suggested, "Why don't we let Jasmine and her kids move into the 4-bedroom condo? It's getting cramped in their current place." Jasmine, Cedric's sister, is a single mother with 3 young children. They're currently living in a 2-bedroom apartment, which I could imagine is becoming quite tight for their growing family. However, my feelings towards Jasmine had never been warm. Each time we crossed paths, she seemed to look down on me for not having children. Cedric and I married just before I turned 30, and even then, Jasmine seemed intent on one-upping me. Her attitude only worsened as I reached that milestone. She would say things like, "You're 30 and still childless. Isn't your life over?" The comments didn't stop there. After my father's passing, she made a particularly cutting remark. "It's such a shame you didn't give your father the chance to meet his grandchild." Despite Jasmine being 3 years older, she often felt more like a younger sister-in-law than a senior. I genuinely wanted to maintain a good relationship, given her family connection, and I tried to make an effort. But after her hurtful comments, I found myself wanting to keep as much distance from Jasmine as possible. I don't have any siblings, and my father was my only close family. Amid the mental and physical exhaustion from losing him, Jasmine's cold words struck me deeply, leaving me with a lasting negative impression. I hadn't seen Jasmine since shortly after my father's passing, so I was taken aback when my mother-in-law made her proposal. She suggested that Jasmine and her kids move into the 4-bedroom condo, offering to cover the rent at just $500 a month. Her expression seemed to convey, "Isn't that a fantastic deal?" I was stunned. While our condo isn't brand new, it has been recently renovated and is well maintained. With good public transport and proximity to a mall, its rental value would surely exceed $2,000. $500? I was taken aback by the audacity of suggesting such a low rent for a 4-bedroom condo. Whether they're unaware of the current market rates or not, it felt incredibly presumptuous. I didn't respond right away, which seemed to lead my mother-in-law to believe I was in agreement, and she continued with her plan. "You have a condo that you're renting out now, right? You could live there instead. Just don't renew the lease. Once you're moved out, Jasmine and her family can move in." "How long is the lease for?" she asked. Cedric, ever the agreeable one, chimed in, "Oh, that's a great idea. The condo where my father lived is modern and stylish, and it's perfect for just the 2 of us." It felt like the conversation was slipping away from me, so I interjected, "Aren't we supposed to be living here together?" The reality is, my in-laws are currently in a single-family home that's largely vacant, with just my father-in-law and mother-in-law residing there. Cedric and Jasmine's rooms remain unused. If Jasmine's family needed more space, wouldn't it make more sense for them to move into my in-laws' home first, rather than asking us to make a move? It turns out, though, that if Jasmine's family moved into my in-laws' home, the children would have to switch schools. They would need to buy new school uniforms and other items, which they considered a waste of money. I couldn't directly refuse my mother-in-law's suggestion about renting the condo to Jasmine, so I said, "This is the home where I was born and raised. It's not something I can just leave behind easily. We ended the conversation and left my in-laws' house without saying anything more. Given that my mother-in-law mentioned, "I'm not saying you have to decide right away," it's clear she hasn't given up on the idea. When I returned to the condo, I confronted Cedric, saying, "This is my family home, you know. How can you agree to leave it so easily?" Cedric looked taken aback, as if he hadn't realized how upset I was. "But your family home is just a condo," he remarked. His lack of an apology was deeply disappointing. Cedric, having grown up in a single-family home, seems to believe that a true family home must be a standalone house. He doesn't seem to grasp why I consider a condo to be my family home. While our different backgrounds might explain his perspective, a simple apology would have been appreciated. My frustration boiled over, and I raised my voice. "The condo is my family home. Stop making decisions about it without consulting me." Cedric seemed irritated when I referred to it as my condo. "What do you mean, your condo? We've been married for 10 years. It's our condo," he shouted back. If he hadn't dismissed my feelings about the condo being my family home or resisted renting it to my sister-in-law, I might have been more receptive to him calling it our condo. But given the situation, his words felt deeply unsettling. Despite numerous discussions, we remained at an impasse. Cedric, who rarely considered my perspective, labeled me as stingy, stubborn, and malicious. We both dug in our heels, and for months we were unable to reach any resolution. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law kept checking in, asking, "Have you given any more thought to our previous discussion?" My patience was wearing thin with both my mother-in-law and Cedric, who refused to support me. Then one day, I received an unexpected text from Jasmine, who was clearly frustrated with the lack of progress. "You don't have kids, so a 2-bedroom condo should be sufficient. Living in a 4-bedroom condo is a luxury for just the two of you. Just move out." I hadn't heard from Jasmine since my mother-in-law first brought up the condo issue, so this message came as a shock. There were no polite requests or appeals, just a direct command to vacate. Who does she think she is? Reading Jasmine's text made me feel foolish for trying to keep things civil up to this point. As I reflected on the situation, the thought of divorce kept creeping into my mind. Despite my efforts to control my emotions, I realized I was at the end of my rope. I visited the courthouse to pick up divorce papers and then made a call to a specific office. A few days later, I went to the county clerk's office to get copies of the property deeds. To my relief, I confirmed that both the condo I live in and the one I'm renting out are solely in my name. With this confirmation, I decided to give my husband one final chance. "I've told you repeatedly that I don't want to rent this condo to Jasmine. It's my family home, and I can't bear the thought of renting it to someone who has belittled me and said hurtful things. I need you to tell her not to count on this place." Cedric's expression was one of clear irritation, as it always was whenever I brought up the issue. Despite having shared everything Jasmine had said to me during our arguments, Cedric still didn't understand. He even remarked, "But Jasmine's point isn't entirely wrong either." Looking back, I should have divorced him right then and there. It would have spared me so much distress. But I lacked the courage to leave someone I had been with for 10 years or to face being alone as I approached 40. Now, things are different. If Cedric rejects my proposal this time, I'm ready to say goodbye. I've made up my mind, and this is my plea. You're so reluctant to leave your family home, but you're only tormenting Jasmine out of spite. It's your own behavior that invites disdain, and honestly, you're exaggerating. The things you've been told aren't as terrible as you're making them out to be. I can't understand why you're being so spiteful." Cedric looked at me with confusion, completely unaware of my resolve. I was at a loss for how Cedric could never support me, no matter how many times I needed it. I told him maybe we just can't understand each other anymore. "Then please fill this out," I said, handing him the divorce papers. I expected him to panic or become agitated, but Cedric merely sneered and smirked at the sight of the papers. "Seriously? Do you think threatening divorce will make me back down?" he retorted. Cedric seemed to believe I wasn't serious about the divorce. I thought to myself, this isn't a threat. I could have managed to get along with Jasmine as my sister-in-law, but now it feels impossible. The same goes for your mother and you. I can't trust you anymore, and there's no love left. It's over. Pack your things and leave now. Unaware of my resolve regarding the divorce, Cedric left. My anger surged and I expressed my frustration. Jasmine and my mom don't actually dislike you. Can't you see this is all your fault for only thinking about yourself? Cedric, feeling that our conversation was going in circles, tried to argue back. I cut him off. Enough. We've reached an impasse. You don't want to understand me, and I don't want to understand you. Divorce is the only option. If you don't sign these papers, I'll file for mediation. I spoke with a cold finality. Cedric responded with a growl, kicked the wall in frustration, and stormed out. He didn't sign the papers or take any of his belongings. He seemed intent on just leaving the situation behind. A few days later, as I had anticipated, Cedric returned. With a look of guilt on his face, he asked, "What should I do?" Did he really think that a display of remorse would make me reconsider? There's nothing more to discuss. Everything is already decided. If you agree to the divorce, sign the papers. If not, I'll file for mediation. Also, I've decided to sell this condo. Yes, I had made up my mind to sell my family home. On the day I went to court to get the divorce papers, I contacted Mr. Allen, a close friend of my father's. I had known Mr. Allen since childhood, and he had been very supportive, even attending my father's memorial service. He had given me his business card, offering his help if I ever needed it. His card listed his law firm, where he worked as a lawyer. Mr. Allen had been instrumental in helping me navigate my father's inheritance by introducing me to a judicial scrivener. When I consulted him about the current situation, he was supportive and provided valuable advice on checking the condo's ownership and preparing for potential complications in the divorce. His guidance gave me the strength to take a firm stand. After Cedric left the house, I made the decision to sell the condo. I reached out to a real estate agent and instructed them to list the property. I also informed Mr. Allen about the failed conversation with Cedric, how he had refused to sign the divorce papers, and how he had left without resolving anything. I asked Mr. Allen for assistance if the situation escalated to mediation. When Cedric learned that the condo was being sold, his eyes widened and his previously indifferent demeanor shifted to a menacing tone. What? So, after all your talk about this being your family home, now you're selling it? Clearly, it wasn't that important to you. You could have rented it to Jasmine if it meant so little. You're just being stingy. Cedric's outburst didn't bother me anymore. I gave him a cold stare, which made him visibly tense. Yet it was clear he wasn't ready to back down. Cedric challenged me, saying, "You can't just decide to sell it on your own. The title might be in your name, but when we divorce, there should be a division of property. This condo was our shared property, wasn't it?" I met his defiance with a smirk and replied, "Too bad. This condo was put in my name by my father just before I got married. Anything I owned before marriage isn't subject to property division. I've already confirmed this with my lawyer." The parting with the family home was difficult. I didn't want to let it become a source of further bad memories. After consulting with Mr. Allen and confirming that the condo wouldn't be part of the property division, I was able to move forward with the decision to sell it. When Cedric learned the truth, his attitude shifted dramatically, and he started clinging to me in a desperate and unseemly manner. Cedric said, "I was wrong. There's no need to rent the condo to Jasmine. It's your precious family home. Are you sure you want to sell it? Since you're still living here, you haven't sold it yet, right? Let's not sell it. We can start over. I'll speak to Jasmine and my mother. Let's not proceed with the divorce or the sale." At that moment, I questioned why I had been with him for 10 years. I felt a deep sense of self-disgust. Don't try to sweet-talk me now. You never supported me, no matter how many times we talked. There's no chance for us to start over. Goodbye. Pack your things and leave as soon as possible. Cedric continued to resist the divorce, leading us to mediation. Eventually, I was able to finalize the separation and part ways with him. Now, I'm free. I initially feared that being single would be daunting, but it's actually quite liberating. I've purchased a new 2-bedroom condo and am embracing my life on my own terms.
Today was Samantha's big day. She was getting married, but things had gone wrong from the very morning. The best hairdresser in town got stuck in traffic, and the zipper on her wedding dress became stuck and nearly broke. "You're just too nervous," her best friend Claire tried to calm the bride. "Calm down, breathe deeply, everything will be fine." The bride's younger sister Melinda looked into the room. "Samantha, you're such a beauty today," she exclaimed. "Melinda, your sister has always been beautiful. Lucky Angelo. His future wife cooks deliciously, does needlework, and manages everything around the house perfectly. It's no wonder Angelo's friends admire her, said the maid of honour. Angelo, the future husband, was a deputy director at a consulting company. Samantha worked there as a legal consultant. She was beautiful, with perfect hair. At work, she always wore her long, light blonde hair in a neat bun. Though Samantha might have seemed arrogant at first glance, she was actually friendly and responsible. Angelo had to work hard to win her attention. She was cautious with men, taking time to trust them. Experiences had taught her this wisdom. Samantha's first love came at 17. Ben was 5 years older and seemed like a prince to her, courting her skillfully and kissing her passionately. Samantha believed she'd never meet anyone better. When she brought Ben home, her mother was sceptical. "He's not right for you, daughter. He doesn't inspire my confidence," her mother warned. "Take your time." But Samantha wouldn't listen. Blindly in love, she believed marriage would change him. "So what if he's a loader? So what if he drinks sometimes? He'll quit when we're married," she thought. One day, Samantha went to his apartment. When she rang the doorbell, a drunken Ben opened. Then a woman emerged from the apartment, announcing she was his wife. "Why did you come here, you young fool?" the woman snapped. Samantha was stunned. She barely remembered getting home. Her world had shattered. Seeing her daughter's state, her mother knew something terrible had happened. She held Samantha close as she burst into tears. "He deceived me. He has a wife. You warned me," Samantha sobbed. "I should have listened to you. I was so naive and foolish." Yet another heartbreak awaited her at 19. While studying at university, Eric, a young teacher, began courting her. They enjoyed walks, movies and exhibitions together. Samantha was fascinated by him, hardly believing such an attractive man would notice her. After 4 months, she introduced him to her mother, who cautioned her again. "Samantha, don't rush. Watch him carefully." Then one day, Eric took Samantha to a cafe. "I'm the happiest man in the world, because the most beautiful girl in the world is sitting near me now," he said. "Samantha, I'm so happy we're together. I love you very much." As he leaned in to kiss her, a pregnant woman approached their table and, with tears, started begging Eric to come home. "Who are you?" Samantha asked in shock. "I'm Eric's fiancé. He's about to become a father. Please leave him alone," the woman pleaded. "I wish you much happiness," Samantha mumbled, rising from the table. She hurried outside and collapsed on a bench, trembling. 5 years passed after that. Samantha was no longer naive and trusting. She had grown into a confident woman who valued herself and protected her heart. When she met Angelo, she was immediately drawn to him. He was athletic, with slightly curly dark blonde hair and grey-blue eyes. He also noticed Samantha right away and began courting her. However, he saw no reciprocity from the girl, which embarrassed him. Usually he didn't spend much time courting women. He'd buy a fancy bouquet, invite his chosen one to a restaurant, and that was it. Women could never resist him. But with Samantha, everything was different. When Angelo gave her flowers, expecting her to be pleased, Samantha explained she couldn't accept them due to her rose allergy. Angelo gave the bouquet to his secretary, who was delighted, but his heart remained captivated by the elusive Samantha. Angelo was experienced and understood well that women sometimes feigned indifference while secretly yearning for romance. Determined not to give up, he bought tickets to a movie premiere, left them on Samantha's desk with a note, "I'll wait for you at the cinema." But disappointment awaited. Samantha never appeared. That evening her mother was celebrating an anniversary. Their apartment was full of guests, Mum's best friends and their husbands, and work colleagues. Samantha greeted everyone, helped with coats and directed them to the dining room. Just as they were about to begin celebrating, the doorbell rang. "Mum, are we expecting anyone else?" asked Samantha. "No, everyone's already here." When Samantha opened the door, she found Angelo staring at her with cold eyes. "Good evening. I was waiting for you at the cinema." "Samantha, who is it? Invite your guest to join us," her mother called out. "It's my mother's birthday party. Please, come in." The celebration turned out wonderfully. Angelo turned out to be the life and soul of the party, entertaining guests and even dancing with Melinda. Samantha's younger sister took quite a liking to him. "If you don't want him, pass him my way," she teased her older sister. "Let's not rush things, sis," Samantha replied. From that day on, she began to see Angelo differently. They started going out together, to cafes, restaurants, exhibitions, and walks in the park. "How beautiful you are," Angelo would say admiringly, words that always warmed Samantha's heart. A year and a half later, Angelo proposed. At 26, Samantha felt ready to start a family, and she accepted. Their wedding was spectacular, with about 40 guests, colleagues, relatives and friends. Samantha chose her friend Claire as maid of honour. "Well, Samantha, you're a married woman now. How does it feel?" "I'm still getting used to it," Samantha answered. "You know," Claire mused, "I heard somewhere that love only lasts 3 years. After that, it's just habit." "Why 3 years?" Samantha wondered. "That's love's expiration date." Claire laughed. "Don't say that," Samantha protested. "Angelo has been courting me for 1.5 years, and our love is real." "I'm sorry, Samantha. I didn't mean anything by it. Of course you'll be happy. Your husband adores you." And so began Samantha's married life. 5 months later, an overjoyed Samantha announced to her husband that they were expecting a child. Angelo embraced and kissed her, grateful for this precious gift. His joy doubled when he learned it would be a boy. The only shadow over their happiness was her difficult pregnancy. Severe morning sickness prevented Samantha from cooking. Her mother and mother-in-law often came by to help prepare meals. Samantha's feet swelled so badly she could barely wear shoes a size larger than normal. Finally, Samantha delivered a healthy baby. When she and little Roger arrived home, a perfect nursery awaited them. Angelo had arranged everything: a crib with a lace canopy by the window, the room filled with toys. However, the baby proved quite restless. Samantha spent most nights rocking and feeding him. During the day, she tended to housework, mopping floors, dusting, cooking dinner. One day, passing a mirror, she caught sight of her reflection. "What do I look like?" Samantha thought, realizing that her husband sees beautiful and well-groomed girls at work, while she has turned into some kind of zombie. Tears came to her eyes, but she immediately remembered that Angelo would soon come from work and began to set the table. Samantha gained a little weight after childbirth, but it made her even more feminine. When her son Roger was 1.5 years old, Samantha became pregnant again. The young woman didn't even want to tell Angelo about it, thinking she should just terminate it, but her sister Melinda insisted that her spouse had the right to know everything. In the evening, when little Roger fell asleep, she told her husband everything. "Angelo, I'm expecting a child, but it's not the right time. I mean, Roger is still too young, and if the pregnancy becomes difficult, who will look after him? Let's wait at least 2 years before thinking about a second child." "Samantha, please keep in mind you're 28 years old. Every year it will become more difficult to give birth and care for a child. I'll hire a nanny. I'm totally against abortion." The second pregnancy was much calmer, without the severe morning sickness she had experienced before. Samantha gave birth to a daughter right on her due date, and when the woman saw the newborn, she realized how right Angelo had been. The baby was adorable, impossible not to love. Life became harder with 2 little ones. When one needed to sleep, the other wanted to play. Though Angelo had promised a nanny, he quickly forgot about it once he saw how well Samantha managed on her own. Fortunately, little Molly was calmer than her brother. Despite being terribly tired, Samantha kept the apartment perfectly clean. She cooked delicious dinners and washed and ironed Angelo's clothes, but had no time for herself. One day, having no strength left at all, Samantha told herself, "I will rest for just 10 minutes." And she fell into a deep sleep immediately. She woke to her husband shaking her shoulder. Samantha opened her eyes to find Angelo holding a crying Molly. Looking at the clock, she realised the baby should have been fed long ago. "Did you go to bed without feeding Molly?" Angelo asked. Resentment welled up inside Samantha. "Yes, I passed by the bed, fell on it, and couldn't get up again." It was their first fight. "Anyway, stop yelling at me. You might scare Roger and Molly. Don't you realise that I'm a human being, not a robot? I'm exhausted. I need your support and understanding, but you just criticise me. When was the last time you took the kids out? You could at least take them on your day off, so I could sleep for a couple of hours. Your clothes are always clean and ironed, the apartment's spotless, dinner's always ready. I do all this myself, and my strength is running out." Samantha burst into tears. "You should take better care of yourself," Angelo replied only and handed Molly to his wife. After this conversation, Angelo began walking the children out on weekends, but Samantha, as many women before and after her, didn't use this time to sleep. Instead, she tidied the apartment, cooked dinner, and occasionally just lay on the bed. She had never realised just how pleasant it could be to lie in silence and solitude. However, she at least started going to a fitness club on Sundays. Time went on. The children grew up healthy, and everything seemed fine. But Samantha had a bad feeling. When her mother visited, Samantha shared her concerns. "Don't think about bad things. Negative thoughts attract bad events. Look how wonderful your kids are." "Mum, I understand, but for some reason my stomach feels uneasy. By the way, how's Melinda doing? Is she getting married yet?" "I keep asking her that too. She's living separately now. She met a man who rented an apartment for her. Melinda says she's fallen head over heels in love with him. She might get married soon." "That would be wonderful," Samantha said. She promised to bring him to meet us as soon as they started talking about marriage. The New Year's corporate party was approaching. It was always a grand celebration, but in her daily routine, Samantha had completely forgotten about it, and Angelo hadn't mentioned the event. On the day of the party, her husband called to say he would be late, and then at 10:30 that evening, Samantha received a call from her colleagues asking why she hadn't come to the party. "Girls, I completely forgot. In a year's time, I'll come for sure. Angelo will cover for both of us." "Samantha, but he wasn't at the restaurant. We thought he went to pick you up. Well, take care and may your children grow up healthy and obedient. Bye." Samantha's heart sank. Her intuition had not deceived her. She called her husband, but his phone was unavailable. After putting the children to bed, the woman waited in the kitchen. At 2:30 in the morning, she saw Angelo's car pull up through the window, and a few minutes later, he quietly entered the house. "Where have you been? Don't tell me you were at the corporate party. I know you weren't there. You've been cheating on me for a while now. Just be honest and admit you have someone else." "What are you talking about, Samantha? I was in negotiations. We had a few drinks afterward. What's the problem?" Though Angelo spoke convincingly, he kept his distance, offering neither a hug nor a kiss. Samantha didn't believe him. She went to sleep on the sofa while he took the bedroom. Times were difficult for their family. The children were constantly ill, and to Samantha it seemed endless. Angelo spent long hours at work, coming home late. He claimed he couldn't work from home because the children were too noisy. "I get an instant headache," he complained to his mother-in-law some day. "And what about Samantha? She lives with the children day and night, and you won't help her?" After that conversation, when Samantha's mother left, he told his wife that her mother wasn't welcome in their house anymore. "Maybe the children and I should leave too?" asked Samantha. "Why do you keep wearing me down? I'm trying my best for all of us." "Angelo, but I also work," answered Samantha. "I work around the clock, without pay, and all I get is advice to take better care of myself. It's easy to give advice when the closet is full of clean pressed clothes, the apartment is spotless and dinner is ready." The next morning, Samantha called a taxi and left with the children to her mother's house. How wonderful, he thought. No shouting or running around. Finally, some peace. And instead of calling Samantha, the man got in his car and drove to where he knew the most valuable woman in the world would be waiting. He missed her. So cheerful, bright and accommodating. An irresistible force drew him to her. She greeted him joyfully. "Honey, how long can you stay with me?" "We have the whole night," he replied, and the woman threw her arms around his neck with delight. Angelo felt like a real man. His mistress's mere presence brought such joy, and that's why he was drawn to her. Their relationship wasn't just about physical pleasure. It made him feel masculine again. With Samantha, things hadn't been the same for a long time. But here, he found affection, understanding, and care. Here, he felt calm and comfortable, unlike at home. This woman tried to please him in everything. They shared a passionate night, falling asleep late at night. Meanwhile, Samantha's mother advised, "You shouldn't leave your husband for so long." "Mum, it's been 3 days, and he hasn't called once. He doesn't care about me or the children. If he loved us, he'd act differently." "Samantha, go home. I'll watch the kids so you and Angelo can spend the weekend together." "All right. Maybe it's a good idea. I'll do as you say." 3 days at her mother's home had transformed Samantha. With just a touch of mascara and lip gloss, she looked radiant again. But Angelo wasn't home. Samantha waited all day, but he never appeared. She cleaned the house and prepared dinner, yet he didn't come home that night. Sunday morning, she called him without a response. She left a note before returning to her mother's. "Angelo, I came by but missed you. Call me. We need to discuss our future. Samantha." Meanwhile, Angelo was with his mistress. He admired her passion and how she never troubled him with problems. A woman should support and adore her man, he thought, embracing her. That evening he returned home. Evidence of Samantha's visit was clear. The apartment was tidy and filled with the aroma of roasted turkey. Finding her note, he called. "Hi, I just got back from a business trip. Are you still at your mum's? I've missed you. I'll come get you now, okay?" "Okay," Samantha agreed. "See, you worried for nothing," her mother said. Angelo noticed Samantha's transformation. "Yes, Angelo, all I needed was some proper rest." They went to bed together that night, but there was no intimacy between them. They talked about Roger and Molly and work until the man fell asleep. He must be tired from the road, Samantha thought sadly and disappointedly. The next day, the woman wanted to discuss her worries, so she called Melinda. "Sis, hi. It's been so long since we've seen each other. Come over, I need to talk to you." "Hi, Samantha. I can't come until Sunday. Work's keeping me busy." "Perfect. Angelo will take the kids out, and we can have a quiet talk." Melinda was nothing like Samantha. She was straightforward and spoke her mind freely. She was almost always cheerful, with a bright smile on her face. Though 3 years younger than Samantha, she loved giving her older sister advice about men, how to attract them, what to say. Samantha found this amusing. Nevertheless, she adored her younger sister. They had been very close in childhood. On Sunday, both women were overjoyed to meet. Samantha noticed Melinda looked more beautiful than ever. "That's what love does to a person," she thought, and said aloud, "Mum told me you met a man." "Yes," Melinda replied, lowering her eyes shyly. "Why so bashful? It's wonderful to love and be loved. Tell me about him." "He's handsome, caring, and generous. He even rented an apartment for me. I'm thrilled with him. I'm so happy for you. When will you marry him? We haven't been dating long, haven't even thought about marriage yet, so I don't want to rush things. It's complicated. What did you want to talk about? Samantha sighed. I think Angelo is cheating on me. He stopped paying attention to me lately. He used to be so passionate in bed, but now he shows no interest. I think he's spending his energy on his mistress. I stayed at Mum's with the kids for 3 days, and Angelo wasn't home during that time. He claimed he was on a business trip. I checked. There was no trip. I'm scared of losing him. We have small children, but I can't stay silent. I'm enabling his cheating. Melinda, what should I do? First, don't panic. Shield your children from your worries. If he does have a mistress, you need to decide, stay or leave. Secondly, be careful. If you reveal that you know everything, you'll force the issue of divorce. Stay level-headed. I've read that unfaithful husbands rarely leave for their mistresses, and if they do, they usually return to their wives. If Angelo hasn't left you yet, he probably won't leave for her. Don't rush into divorce. Take care of yourself. Spend some time away from home, and don't neglect yourself. The sisters talked more before Melinda left. Thank you, dear. I feel better after talking to you. Samantha hugged Melinda as a farewell. That evening, she told her husband she wanted to return to work and they needed to hire a nanny. Angelo objected, but Samantha remained firm. I won't start working until we find a good nanny. Don't worry. Angelo had to agree. The very next day, Samantha interviewed a woman with kindergarten experience. Mrs. Angus was a pleasant, petite woman, about 50 years, with short blonde hair. The children watched her curiously. The boy approached and said, "My name is Roger. Pleased to meet you." Molly came over too. The nanny-to-be picked her up, and throughout her visit, the girl wouldn't leave her arms. "Mrs. Angus, the children have gotten along with you. Come tomorrow at 8:30. Your workday will end at 6. Don't worry about payment. We'll be fair." When Samantha returned after her first day back at work, she heard children's laughter. Mrs. Angus was telling Roger and Molly a story. The children saw their mother, ran to kiss her, then hurried back to their nanny. So, Samantha got a reliable assistant. She missed her work and happily plunged back into business. Gradually, she lost the excess weight and regained her former shape. Samantha sensed Angelo's attention returning. They became intimate again, and she exhaled with relief. Meanwhile, Angelo began visiting his mistress less frequently, and she was furious. "You promised to tell her everything. You've deceived her for almost a year, and now you decide to play the faithful husband?" "I wanted to tell her, but she's attractive again. She's lost weight. I can't leave her. I love her. And we have kids." "You do? What about me? You said you loved me." "I'm confused. I love you too. But I can't leave Samantha." "When will you come see me again?" "In 3 days, perhaps." Angelo went outside and sighed heavily. This affair had begun to strain him. He decided it was time to end it. 3 days later, Samantha was at work, reviewing reports. Suddenly, a message appeared on her phone. "Your husband is with his mistress now. Come to this address." Without delaying, Samantha called a taxi and left. That day, Angelo intended to end things with his mistress. He spoke firmly so that she'd have no hope of continuing the affair. But when he finished speaking, she asked for one last time together. Though he refused at first, she knew how to ignite his desire. Then the doorbell rang. Angelo opened it and froze in shock. There was Samantha, staring at his bare chest and then at her sister, appearing in the hallway. "Melinda, so you're the one my husband's been cheating with?" "Angelo, I hate you," Samantha shouted and fled the apartment. "Samantha, wait, I can explain." Angelo called after her, but she wouldn't listen. How did she find out about us? Who gave her your address?" "How should I know?" Melinda replied, avoiding his gaze. "Clearly you told her. Did you think I'd leave her for you? You fool, you've ruined everything." Though Angelo knew Samantha wouldn't let him in, he went home anyway. His bags were already outside the door. He rang the bell repeatedly, but no one answered. "To hell with you," he shouted angrily. "Samantha, please open up for your husband. You should talk before making any fatal mistakes," the nanny pitched in. "Mrs. Angus, mind the children. I don't need your advice." "Excuse me," said the nanny, taking the children to their room. Meanwhile, Angelo chose a hotel over going to Melinda's. He wanted to see no one. After 2.5 months in the hotel, he still ignored Melinda's constant calls. He saw Samantha daily at work and knew that she filed for divorce. The court granted them reconciliation time, though Samantha deemed it unnecessary. Their minds were made up. So, once it expired, they divorced. One evening, lying in bed, Angelo reflected, "I wanted solitude, and now I have it. Why am I unhappy then? Everything seems to be fine, but my conscience apparently won't let me rest. I cheated on Samantha, failed as a father, and abandoned my children." However, these remorseful feelings were fleeting. As for Samantha, she tried to adjust to her new role, but first she decided to apologize to Mrs. Angus. "Mrs. Angus, I want to apologize for my rudeness that day. I should have controlled my temper. Please forgive me. And thank you for staying with me and the kids during these dark days, and for your huge support." "Oh, Samantha, I understand how difficult this is for you. Don't isolate yourself or dwell alone with your worries. That path leads to depression. Don't blame yourself. You're strong, and you'll get through this." Samantha rested her head on Mrs. Angus's shoulder, crying softly like a child, but already feeling better. Mrs. Angus was right. She would survive this. She had 2 beautiful children, and though she still had feelings for Angelo, his betrayal was slowly erasing them from her heart. "Thank you, Mrs. Angus. You're not just a wonderful nanny. You've become family to me." A few weeks later, Samantha received a call from her worried mother. "Hello, dear. How are you? I'm concerned about Melinda. She's moved back home and something's wrong. Has she mentioned to you anything about her relationship?" "Mum, you should ask her directly. I can't say anything now. I'm sorry." "I'm terrified she'll do something rash. I've never seen her like this. Besides, she's about to move to another town to her school friend. Samantha, please tell me what you know. I'm sick with worry." "Mum, I can't tell you yet. The truth about Melinda will take time to explain." "Samantha, what do you mean? Did she deceive someone?" "Much worse." Then a letter arrived for Samantha, with no return address, but she recognized her sister's handwriting. Though tempted to throw it away, she still read it. "Samantha, I'm so sorry for hurting you. I just wanted to be happy for a while, and I regret it now. Your Melinda." 3 years passed. Samantha worked and the children grew. Angelo visited them occasionally. Over those 3 years, he had other women who adored him and would have gladly married him, but he had no desire to marry any of them. He involuntarily compared each one to Samantha, and they all fell short. One day he arrived at Samantha's with a bouquet of flowers and gifts for the children. When he began speaking about his enduring love, she stopped him. "Angelo, I don't have any feelings for you any more. Everything changed when I discovered your affair with Melinda. You're young and attractive. You'll find love again. Don't bring this up again. I've made up my mind." "But we were so happy together." "Yes, we were. I don't want to continue this conversation. I'm tired, and it's time for the kids to go to bed." Angelo left, devastated, finally accepting that he had lost Samantha forever. As for Samantha, She decided she didn't need men in her life. She had Roger and Molly, her mother and her beloved job. That was enough. I need a real man. I won't settle for less. It's simple for me. He should be faithful, reliable, caring, and respect and love my children. But I doubt I'll ever meet such a man again. Nevertheless, everything is fine as it is. Samantha, to find love, you must first love yourself. Men are drawn to women who make them feel at ease. By the way, how will you celebrate New Year's? At home with my children and Mum. You're welcome to join us. Samantha, let's invite Santa Claus. The children would love it. My neighbour always plays Santa for his relatives' children. He could visit Roger and Molly too. We'll learn holiday poems and songs, decorate the tree, hang garlands. All right, Mrs. Angus, arrange it with your acquaintance. I'll pay whatever is needed. No, Samantha, he doesn't accept payment. He's quite well off. He simply enjoys making children happy. Besides, he's not married. He has 2 nephews he entertains this way. Samantha bought a beautiful Christmas tree. Mrs. Angus helped Roger and Molly decorate it with ornaments and lights, transforming the house into a festive wonderland. Their Santa Claus would arrive at 8:30, after visiting his brother's children. The children were delighted. Bill excelled at playing Santa Claus, with his commanding voice bringing the character to life. Samantha felt transported back to childhood, as if she had stepped into a fairy tale. Roger and Molly recited New Year poems and sang songs for Santa Claus. Well, New Year approaches and I must rest, Santa Claus announced before bidding everyone farewell. On January the 3rd, Samantha's phone rang with a familiar booming voice. Bill, inviting her and the children for a walk. When they met, she saw him properly for the first time. A tall, handsome man with swarthy skin and eyes so brown they appeared almost black. Though 7 years her junior, Bill carried himself with confidence. After their walk, Samantha invited him home. They shared a meal, watched a New Year's movie with the children, and before leaving, Bill said, "Perhaps we could take the children to the sledding hill sometime." "I'll call you," Samantha replied softly. They spent the winter holidays together. The children adored Bill. He was just like a big kid himself, sledding with them, building snowmen, and joining in snowball fights. Melinda gazed pensively out the train window as it carried her away from home. The journey wasn't long, giving her time to reflect. She had fallen in love with Angelo at first sight. After her mother's birthday celebration, she had hoped Angelo would choose her, but he pursued Samantha instead. Their first intimate encounter happened a year ago after he called, wanting to meet at her home. Though at work she made an excuse and rushed to prepare everything meticulously, setting the table, lighting candles, donning a form-fitting dress. She smiled, remembering how Angelo had barely noticed her careful preparations, leading her straight to bed. Their passion had been exquisite and overwhelming. Their meetings became regular after that. Her friend Tara met her with a bouquet of flowers. She was still as cheerful, round-faced with freckles on her cheeks and nose and big blue eyes. "Hello, Melinda," Tara said with a smile, holding out the bouquet. "I came by car to pick you up, and I've already found you an apartment. You'll spend the night at my place, and tomorrow I'll help you move in." And so Melinda's new life began. The studio apartment was on the 2nd floor, simple but cosy. Melinda was a manicurist. Tara helped her get a job in a small beauty salon, and soon, because of her hard working and excellent skills, she began to earn good money. But when Melinda came home, she often cried from loneliness. Though men often tried to court her, Melinda always compared them to Angelo, and they fell short. When Melinda thought about her past and future, she fell into despair. Could it be nothing good ahead of her? Sometimes Melinda went to parties with friends, but returning home only made her sadder. She hated those parties. So many people around, yet no one to talk to. No one needs me in this world, Melinda thought as she fell asleep alone. Sometimes she considered returning to her hometown. Maybe Angelo would miss her and want to resume their relationship. Melinda began having nightmares and waking up. Melinda often cried, realizing that her current loneliness was payback for betraying her sister. One more year passed. Nothing changed in Melinda's personal life. She dated men, yet they all vanished without explanation. "Tara, I feel terrible. Nobody needs me," she used to complain to her friend. "Yesterday I didn't even go to the salon. I didn't want my clients to see my condition." "What's wrong with you, Melinda? I don't recognize you. Where's my cheerful friend? Where's your spirit?" "It's all gone. Loneliness is consuming me. Sometimes I don't even want to live. It's so bad." When Melinda told Tara why she had left her hometown, she couldn't believe what she heard. "Melinda, what you had done was really cruel. How could you do that? I remember how your sister loved you. She studied with you when your parents weren't home." "I'm ashamed of what I did, but I don't regret anything. I loved and was loved. Angelo is such a wonderful man. I was happy with him." "But he was married. You took someone else's husband. I'm sorry to be blunt, Melinda, but if I were Samantha, I'd give you a good beating. You left children without a father." "Tara, please stop. I'm suffering enough. I've already paid for everything." A few weeks later, Tara called Melinda and invited her to their dacha for some relaxation in nature. A friend of her husband's would be there, a single man she wanted to introduce her to. Melinda agreed with pleasure. On the appointed day she arrived at her friend's place. The weather was beautiful, though Melinda felt slightly nervous. A grey Mercedes pulled up, and a man of medium height stepped out. Melinda noticed nothing remarkable about him, except his blonde hair and grey eyes. During the introduction, Melinda remained calm and polite. The man prepared kebabs, while Morris, the new acquaintance, played guitar beautifully. Melinda and Tara sang some of their favourite songs together. When Melinda was leaving, Morris offered Melinda a ride. He clearly liked her, but after dropping her off at her entrance, he simply drove away, without asking to come up for tea. Just like always. He doesn't want me either, Melinda thought. The next day she asked Tara if Morris had mentioned her, but her friend said he hadn't called or asked about her. Another disappointment, Melinda sighed. Wait, maybe this is his strategy, Tara said. Don't jump to conclusions. He'll probably call. 5 more days passed without a call from Morris. Melinda couldn't understand why this man occupied her thoughts, perhaps because things hadn't ended as she'd hoped. A week later, Morris finally called. The first date was thrilling. Melinda wore a blue cocktail dress, styled her hair up to show her neck, and applied eyeshadow, mascara and lipstick. This should do, she thought. Black stilettos completed her outfit. Her hands were cold with excitement when the doorbell rang. Morris stood there in a perfectly fitted grey suit, his eyes fixed on Melinda. You look lovely tonight. Melinda had been dating Morris for 5 months. Their relationship wasn't particularly passionate, more respectful and steady. One day Melinda received a letter from her mother, who preferred writing letters the old-fashioned way, instead of talking on the phone. Samantha is getting married to Bill, a good man, though 7 years younger than her. She is pregnant. Roger and Molly adore him. Mrs. Angus still works for them, helping the children with their lessons. Angelo married some girl he had made pregnant. He wants to leave her, but her wealthy, well-connected relatives forced him to the registry office. Melinda, I've missed you terribly. Come home for a few days. Tell me how you're doing and about your love life. Kisses and hugs, my darling. After reading the letter, Melinda thought bitterly about how Samantha had always been lucky. 2 children and such a good man again. Why did some people get everything while others had to fight for their happiness? Nevertheless, she decided to visit home to congratulate Samantha and make peace with her. Deep down, she also wanted to show her sister that she settled well too, so she invited Morris along. When her mother opened the door and saw her youngest daughter, she exclaimed, "Melinda, why didn't you tell me you were coming? I'm so glad to see you." "Mum, I'm happy to meet you too, and meet Morris, my close friend." At this moment, Samantha came out from the kitchen. After a moment of hesitation, Melinda said, "Hello, little sister. Congratulations on your wedding day." "Why have you come?" Samantha asked without welcoming. "I came to see our mum, and to see you, and apologise for my past mistakes. Let's forget the offences." "I can't forget anything," Samantha replied. "I forgave you, but I cannot forget the past." "What happened between you two?" the mother demanded. "Explain, finally." "Nothing special. Melinda just slept with my husband and ruined my family, and now she's asking me to forgive her. Well, Mum, I'm going home. I'll call you later. Bye." The mother was shocked. Melinda stood with heart, head down in silence. The next day, before leaving town, Melinda called her sister one more time, apologised again, and wished her well. "All the best to you too," Samantha replied coldly and hung up. During the drive back, Morris barely spoke to Melinda. Each was lost in their thoughts. Melinda wondering what Morris would do after Samantha's revelation, while the man realised Melinda wasn't as straightforward as he had believed. He saw her differently now, and was glad he hadn't proposed. When they reached her house, he gave her a curt goodbye and drove away. Inside her apartment, Melinda collapsed onto her bed, sobbing. She knew Morris would never call again. Her fresh start in this city had failed. After weighing all pros and cons, the woman decided to return home forever. 4 years had passed. Nothing had changed in Melinda's life, except she had put on a little weight, but it suited her. One day after work, she decided to take a walk in the park. The weather was pleasant, the sun shining, a light breeze blowing. Melinda sat down on a bench and closed her eyes in pleasure. "Good evening," came the quiet voice of an elderly woman. "Hello," Melinda said in surprise, opening her eyes to see a short, thin old woman wearing a handkerchief with ancient patterns. "Do we know each other?" Melinda asked. "No, we don't know each other, but I sense that your soul is envious. You are very proud, and pride is a grave sin. Go to the church for confession, and everything will work out for you." Melinda blinked in surprise, and when she opened her eyes, the strange elderly woman had vanished. Where had she gone so quickly? For someone so elderly, she had disappeared with remarkable speed. Melinda felt uneasy and went home, but the conversation with the elderly woman lingered in her mind. Eventually, she began to think that she really should visit the church, and one Sunday she did it. Melinda found herself deeply moved in the church, and soon she began visiting it every Sunday. After proper preparation, she confessed her sins to the priest. Afterward, her heart felt lighter. Another year passed. Melinda longed to see that elderly woman again, and then one day it unexpectedly happened. She hurried to her, but before she could speak, the woman said, "Don't say anything. I know everything. It's good that you confessed. Now your life will change for the better. Keep your soul from sin." The elderly woman rose from the bench and walked away. Later, Melinda met her future husband in the church, a man of about 45 who stood weeping bitterly. She learned that his wife and son had died in a car accident. Melinda and Paul began supporting each other. 10 months later, they married. with Samantha, she never managed to fully reconcile, though they would see each other occasionally at family holidays. "Hello, Nancy," the older woman greeted warmly. "Hello, Mrs. Arrington." Nancy nodded in reply. "It's so hot today. Do you always sell here? I think it would be better in the shade." "Well, this spot is good. It's near the bus stop, so more people come by," Nancy responded with a smile. "Well, give me a litre jar then." The young woman adjusted her white headscarf, which concealed her long curly hair, and stooped behind the makeshift counter where she was selling homemade milk. Nancy had the look of a true villager, strong, sturdy, with a robust posture. Her slightly rough skin was tanned, but it didn't detract from her appearance. On the opposite, it added a simple charm. "You're as busy as a bee," Mrs. Harrington exclaimed. "I have to be. My mother is ill and I'm raising my son alone. We all need money these days. No one will feed us for free." "Yes, we all miss your Tom. He was a good man. It's a shame he died so young and left you alone," the elderly woman said sympathetically. Nancy gazed downward, her lower lip caught between her teeth in sadness. The sharp sting of loss had faded over the years, but the memories of her husband, a casualty at his workplace, still haunted her. "He was such a great forest man. He knew every twig in the forest and never let the poachers off the hook. He was constantly chasing them." "That's why they killed him," Nancy whispered. "How cruel they were! A gunshot to his back? How could anyone murder over some worthless fur? It's all because of this hunting business." "The worst part is that they never caught his murderer. The case was either silenced or there was no evidence." "It's all bribes from those villains." Mrs. Arrington dismissed her with a wave of her hand. "Our new gamekeeper, curse him! He is much more compliant than Tom. He avoids disputes with poachers, and look at him now, living a good life. Where does he get his money? He must be making a fortune." "Yes, it's impossible to earn that much by honest labour in our neck of the woods," Nancy replied with a sad grin. "Our district isn't that wealthy. I work on a farm, and even then it's not enough. I had to get my own cow and sell milk on the highway during weekends. That's how we make ends meet." "You poor thing. Why did such a good person end up with such a difficult life?" Mrs. Arrington shook her head sympathetically. "Well, I must get going. I have things to do at home, and I should put the milk in the fridge before it sours in the heat." "Goodbye," Nancy waved. She waited until Mrs. Arrington was out of sight before sinking heavily into her chair. The only customer in an hour was an acquaintance. Business was slow today, and the intense heat wasn't helping. "Phew, it's so hot. I can hardly breathe," Nancy said, touching her kerchief. "And there's nobody around. If something were to happen, there would be no one to help." Suddenly, her vision blurred. Nancy tried to stand, but her legs gave way, and she collapsed by the roadside, unconscious. "Should we call an ambulance?" a male voice called out from somewhere. Nancy tried carefully to open her eyes, wondering how much time had passed since she fell. She was roused by someone gently slapping her cheeks and sprinkling cool water on her face from a bottle. "Just wasting time," a female voice suddenly remarked. Nancy realized she was lying on the ground. The unexpected rescuer was not in sight, but a luxurious car parked directly in front of her drew her attention. A fancy car like that couldn't belong to someone poor. "How can you say that? What if she needs medical assistance? What if she doesn't regain consciousness?" a man retorted in indignation. "As if I care. Look, she's already opened her eyes," a woman retorted irritably. A worried stranger's face soon came into Nancy's view. He was well groomed with dark hair and a neat beard. Nancy's gaze shifted slightly and landed on a tidy name tag reading, "Harris, first-class driver." "Are you okay?" the man asked sympathetically. "I think so. Yes, I'm sorry," Nancy whispered. "Let me help you up." The driver extended his hand, allowing Nancy to lean on him as he gently helped her to her feet. Now, Nancy could freely look around and noticed a young woman in the back seat of the car. She also could assess the stature and strength of her unexpected saviour. He was a striking man, with vibrant green eyes, gleaming with unquenchable optimism. However, now his face was filled with worry. "Are you sure you're okay? Should we call for help?" the driver asked. "Are we leaving today or not?" The woman in the car immediately interrupted him. "Becky, why are you so rude?" the man said to her, and the woman snorted, crossing her arms over her chest. She was looking indifferently at Nancy, conveying her lack of interest in the plight of a mere peddler. Becky was a rich young woman, known for her impeccable looks and fashion sense. Unlike Nancy, she was admired for her graceful figure and perfect proportions. Her skin was flawless and firm, without any extra muscle or tan line. It was clear that Becky invested a lot of time and used high-end cosmetics to maintain her appearance. "Don't be embarrassed. I'm from the provinces myself. Therefore, I am always ready to help rural people." The driver smiled, taking Nancy's hiccup on his own account. "Thank you. I apologize for your delay." Nancy couldn't help but smile back. "I think you should end your work for today. I would walk you home, but I need to drive my passenger." He motioned towards Becky. "You must have broken some kind of rules to help me, huh? Will you be all right?" "Yes, he will," Becky hissed vindictively. "I'll make sure to tell my father that we're late because he decided to flirt with the milkmaids." Nancy looked at Becky in surprise. As a simple villager, she was not used to such open hostility, especially from a stranger who she had never wronged. "Report to whomever you wish. I couldn't leave a woman in trouble." Harris waved off dismissively. Becky's threats didn't seem to have made an impression on him, but Nancy felt awkward. "Excuse me, and thank you for your help." She frowned. "Now go, just go. I'll get home on my own." "Dad, can you believe it?" Becky shrieked from the threshold as soon as she and Harris arrived at the house. "What happened?" Mr. Mayor asked, raising an eyebrow in surprise. This elegant gentleman epitomized the image of dignity and trustworthiness. Despite his age, he maintained a proud posture and an aura of confidence. The slight wrinkles on his face enhanced his dignified image, reflecting a wealth of life experience. "Instead of taking me home, your driver was flirting with some kind of milkmaids," Becky accused, glaring at her father. "Really?" Mr. Mayor looked even more surprised. "Harris, what happened?" The driver had just entered the house, carrying Becky's bags. "You see, we were driving along the highway, and there was a woman selling milk near a stop. She fainted from the heat. I saw it and I stopped to help her. You know, bring her to her senses." "And is that all?" grinned Becky's father. "Daughter, you need to be considerate. You're surrounded by real people, not robots." "Do we owe her anything? We can't save everyone," the girl hissed in anger. "What's wrong with stopping to help? Human life is no joke. If someone falls ill in front of you, the normal reaction is to offer help." "Why are you talking to me like a child? I'm actually 25 years old, if you haven't noticed," Becky exclaimed angrily. "Well, if you're an adult, then stop acting like a child and behave yourself," Mr. Mayor immediately retorted. He deeply loved his only daughter, who was a living reminder of his wife, who had tragically died from an illness. But at times, Becky was unbearable, throwing tantrums without reason. Whether this was a result of her upbringing or resolved teenage rebellion, Mr. Mayor was uncertain. He didn't know how to rectify this behaviour, but he held on to the hope that with time his daughter would mature and become more reasonable. "As you say," the girl snorted and then left the room, slamming the door defiantly. "Harris, do you think that woman is decent?" asked the man unexpectedly. "I don't know. We didn't have much time to socialise," shrugged the driver, "but she was very embarrassed about delaying us and seemed more concerned about me getting in trouble for violating regulations than her health. Can you find her? Ask her if she would like to work for me as a maid." "Well, I don't think finding her will be a problem. I remember the place where she has been selling her products. But why her?" You see, a maid works right in the house. She will be in constant contact with us and know pretty much everything that's going on. That's why I don't want to hire anyone from a professional agency. Lately, rumours have started circulating that employees of such offices like to leak information to their employers. Are you afraid of business rivals? Harris nodded understandingly. Yes, because I've run into them many times. I found bugs after electricians and cameras. I have too big business and too much money in production. And you think a girl from the countryside wouldn't consider engaging in espionage out of the goodness of her heart? Harris frowned. The suggestion seemed to upset Harris. The driver, a simple man from the suburbs, had started working for Mr. Mayer purely by chance. He enjoyed working for the businessman, who was known for his fairness and good treatment of his employees. Yet, amidst such luxury, Harris still felt improper. Just hope that a man from the province will be nobler, above these underhanded intrigues, Mr. Mayer. Harris's thoughts didn't escape his watchful eye, therefore he added, especially since I have one good example of such a man. The man winked at Harris, who, realizing the reference was to him, became slightly embarrassed. His relationship with Mr. Mayer felt more fatherly than that of a subordinate to a superior. Over the years, Harris had developed sincere respect for the businessman, who had seen life and always listened to his opinion, even if they sometimes disagreed. And furthermore, Mr. Mayer continued, I need a quick, unpretentious, hard-working woman who doesn't command an excessively high salary. So you want to save money? Harris muttered. I just don't want to overpay for an agency brand name. Don't worry, I won't cut into her salary. She'll certainly earn more than from selling milk at the bus stop. Almost immediately after their conversation, Harris went to search for a future maid. However, she was nowhere to be found. There were no passers-by who knew the saleswoman as well. I should have escorted her home, then I would have gotten her address, the driver said to himself as he examined the empty bus stop. What upset him most was that he was the one who advised her to go home to avoid another fainting spell. Should I leave a note? Harris lingered, scanning his surroundings, but without any clues to her address, he decided to return the following day. A note with his address or personal number could easily fall into the wrong hands, and considering Mr. Mayer's excessive suspiciousness, it was best not to disturb him. Moreover, he had been complaining about his troubled heart lately, so there was no need for additional stress. Oh, come on, Harris grumbled, finding the bus stop empty again. This was the second time out of luck. He didn't even know the saleswoman's schedule. Would she return? Harris was determined to keep his word to Mr. Mayer, so he resolved to continue his attempts. Hello! I finally found you here, Harris exclaimed on the third day. Luck was finally on his side, and he jumped joyfully out of the car upon spotting the woman in a white headscarf. Good afternoon, she responded, smiling shyly. His unexpected appearance made her cautious. However, the handsome driver didn't seem threatening, and the fact that he had visited for days just to see her warmed the lonely woman's heart. I completely forgot to introduce myself last time. I'm Harris. It's a pleasure to meet you here, in consciousness. Nancy. Beautiful name. Harris smiled. Nancy, would you be interested in a job change? My boss is offering a position as a maid at his country estate. It's nearby, and the work is pleasant. What kind of maid am I? Nancy responded, gesturing dismissively. It's nothing difficult. Your main duties would be maintaining cleanliness and order in the house. Occasionally you might need to run errands for Mr. Mayer, my boss. I'm not sure. Give it some thought. What's there to lose? It's a job in a big, beautiful house, and certainly beats standing on the curb selling milk. The offer was tempting from the start, but Nancy knew it just wasn't possible. As she understood it, a maid's job required her to be constantly at her employer's home. I simply can't stay away from my home for a long time, Nancy replied, her gaze faltering. I need to take care of my mother, and I have a son as well. Don't even worry about it. Mr. Mayor assumed you wouldn't want to leave your household, so there will be no need for you to live in his house. I will bring you and take you back every day. No transportation problems, and all at the employer's expense. Give it some thought. It's a great job opportunity. Well, there is some truth in what you say, Nancy muttered. Why not give it a try? Great. Shall we go to the interview? I'll just let Mr. Mayor know. Harris, I'm sorry, but first I have to take the rest of the milk home. Nancy interrupted the driver. Wait for me here. I'll be right back. Oh, don't even worry. I have a car. I'll take you. This time, Harris decided not to miss the opportunity to find out Nancy's address, so as not to lose contact. Well, I see you're a decent woman, hard-working, dexterous. Quite a match for me, Mr. Mayor said. Thank you. I tried. Nancy smiled. The interview was a bit strange. The businessman didn't want to waste time on long conversations, so he immediately asked the potential employee to clean one of the rooms. Well, if it goes on like this, we're in for a very profitable cooperation. You can start your duties tomorrow, and here is a salary, payable at the beginning and middle of the month. Nancy modestly accepted the envelope. Even at first glance, there was 10 times more money than she was paid on the farm, not to mention the milk trade. And another paycheck was expected in just 2 weeks. There's too much here. I'm afraid you're overestimating me, Nancy muttered, offering the envelope back. Nancy, I'm a business person. Profitable investments are my job. Trust me, my company never wastes money. Nancy had already been a maid for several weeks. She was diligent in her duties, and after receiving the rest of her salary, she became even more committed. Get out of my way! Becky's displeased voice rang out suddenly. What? Nancy, busy dusting the cupboards, did not immediately respond to Mr. Mayor's daughter's command, resulting in a sharp nudge to her side. Are you deaf? Becky snapped. I'm sorry. The woman quickly moved to the opposite end of the room, trying to stay out of sight of the volatile young woman. Becky had disliked the new maid from the first day, constantly attempting to humiliate or tease her. By the way, make sure you change the linens by tomorrow. If I have to sleep on dirty sheets one more time because of you... They're fresh, Nancy said quietly. Are you still arguing? Becky advanced menacingly towards the maid, even swinging her hand. Becky, your father is calling for you, said Harris, entering the room. What are you doing here? None of your business, Becky shouted. Okay, but your father is still waiting for you. Becky turned abruptly and quickly left the room, causing the door jambs to rattle with another slam. Hysterical girl, Harris said at her back, and turned to Nancy. What's your problem? Nothing, Nancy replied, barely audible. Harris squinted at the maid, shrinking in the corner. It was apparent that Mr. Mayor's daughter was intentionally attacking the new employee, harbouring hatred at some subconscious level. Do you want me to tell Mr. Mayor anything? Harris suggested, referring to Becky's antics. Don't. He'll be upset. I don't want to cause trouble in the family. The woman shook her head. But this can't continue. It's okay. You're too kind. Harris sighed. I wish I could scold her, even though she's already a grown woman. But who's going to let me? I'm also a subordinated person. Nancy smiled at his support, and Harris, for the umpteenth time, noted her natural beauty, which was increasingly captivating him. And what time will you be home today? He asked. I'll be a bit late. You heard it yourself. Becky wants new bedding. Why don't you let me help you then? Oh, then that fool will claim that you've spilled oil all over her car. Nancy smiled. Considering that I've never opened the hood myself, and all the work is done by the mechanics at the service, Harris chuckled. At this moment, unable to pull himself together, Harris moved closer to the maid and suddenly kissed her on the lips. She blushed, feeling like a schoolgirl sneaking a kiss with her lover under the stairs. Nancy stood on her toes and reciprocated the kiss. She felt as comfortable and at ease with Harris as never before. "Who would have thought that I'd have to thank my work for a relationship with such a beautiful woman?" The man smiled gently. "It happened because you're a bad driver," sighed Nancy languidly. "Why is that?" "Because you were looking at me more than at the road." "I just felt a mutual interest and decided not to miss the opportunity." Harris winked. "Sometimes I think I shouldn't agree to a date so quickly," Nancy smiled. "We missed the stage where the gallant knight wins the lady's heart. But we can get to the most interesting part," the driver whispered conspiratorially before kissing her again. "I think that's what's bothering Becky most of all." "What's the big deal? Do you think she's interested in me?" "Of course. How could anyone overlook a handsome man with such a huge ego?" Nancy giggled, poking Harris in the chest with her fist. "Seriously speaking, she's just used to considering everyone around her as her property. And now, it turns out, I've taken her toy." "Maybe." The man shook his head. "Oh, I completely forgot. I need to get more gas before we hit the road. I'm sorry, I won't be able to help you with making the bed, or I won't have a vehicle to drive you home." "Go then." Nancy smiled and returned to her duties. "Nancy, come here, please." Mr. Mayer's voice came from the kitchen. "Yeah? What's happened?" she asked, opening the door. "Well, it's me who wanted to ask you what happened here." The landlord pointed melancholically to an overturned flower pot, its soil scattered all over the floor. "I'm sorry. I'll clean it up right away," the maid exclaimed. "Yes, please do, before the soil scatters all over the house." Mr. Mayer nodded. "And the guest room is a mess too. I've been finding too much clutter lately. Please pay closer attention to the house, and more frequently." "I'm sorry. It won't happen again," Nancy muttered, blushing. She felt embarrassed to be reprimanded. Mr. Mayer was a very patient man, and he rarely scolded her, understanding that it was challenging to constantly monitor such a large house. He simply pointed out the mistakes so they wouldn't go unnoticed. But the most frustrating part was that the increasing disturbances in different parts of the house were not accidental. "By the way, Becky asked again for you to be fired. Why don't you get along with her?" As if by accident, the businessman asked. "I don't know. Apparently she thinks I'm not professional enough," the woman answered modestly. "Well, Nancy, try to make peace with her. Harmony at home is a crucial element of life." "I will," she responded. However, it didn't depend on Nancy. In fact, Becky constantly created a mess on purpose and then swiftly ran to her father to highlight Nancy's negligence. Naturally, Nancy couldn't clean everything in time, which left Mr. Mayer thinking she was lazy and not very diligent. However, the businessman was not quick to dismiss the new employee because of her diligent ethic in the first weeks of work. "Yes, it's a large house. It's unfortunate that Tammy, Becky's mother, left so early. She had everything under control. Now it's just a semblance of a family home," Mr. Mayer said, a note of sadness in his voice. "I sympathize with you. My husband also passed away early, and it's challenging to fill that void. But it's never too late to let another person into your heart," Nancy cautiously consoled her host. "I suppose it's a bit late for me," replied Mr. Mayer, rubbing his chest. "I used to think the same, but you know, the main thing is to meet the right person." The man shuddered. Memories of Tammy caused a painful sting in his heart, leading to another round of unpleasant spasms. "Would you like some water?" suggested Nancy, full of anxiety. "No." "Oh!" Mr. Mayer staggered, then lost consciousness. "Did you two lovebirds knock Daddy out?" Becky hissed, her anger directed at the driver and the maid. "What does this have to do with us?" Harris retorted. "Everything. Your negligence stressed him out, leading him to the hospital. He suffered a heart attack. We don't know when he'll be back." Nancy sobbed. The unfortunate attack had happened before her eyes, and she was still worried. actually considering herself guilty. When she saw him on the floor, she was confused, thought too long, and called an ambulance only 5 minutes later. At first, she went looking for Harris, then Becky. Only then did she realise she was alone and began dialing the ambulance, her fingers trembling over the keys. "I've had enough of you two. While my father is receiving treatment, I'm in charge. As the mistress of this house, my first action is to fire both of you. Pack your things and leave." After reprimanding her former subordinates, Becky stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. "Go to the hell." "Harris, don't," Nancy urged Harris. "Let's go. Nothing can be fixed now. It's better for us to leave peacefully." "You're right. Let's visit Mr. Mayer. He's been in the hospital for days, and she hasn't visited him once. She doesn't care about how her not young father feels, as long as she gets her hands on the family's money." "But we're there almost every day. He might be sick of us." "No. The doctors say social interaction and positive emotions are the best medicine. Let's go." "Don't tell him she fired us. We shouldn't give any extra stress. Let him get better without such news." "Of course," Harris agreed. He left the official car keys and documents, took Nancy's hand, and led her to his old car. It wasn't as flashy as the owner's, but it was well kept and functional. The drive to the hospital took about half an hour. "How are you doing, Chief?" Harris cheerfully asked as they were led to Mr. Mayer's room. "I'm hanging in there." The businessman attempted a smile. "Hello," Nancy greeted him with a sad smile. Mr. Mayer tried to brace himself and even attempted to get up, but it was clear to see he was not feeling well. "Is Becky not with you?" Mr. Mayer asked hopefully. "Sorry, no," Nancy replied, shaking her head. "She's busy, planning to inherit and lead your empire." Harris couldn't help himself and replied. "She's never had any family feelings," Mr. Mayer sighed, "and she has always been a real headache. I suppose I failed in raising her." "It's understandable. She grew up without a mother. It might have affected her," Nancy proposed, shrugging her shoulders. "I tried my best to fill in for Tammy, but," whispered the sick man with difficulty. "Enough of this. Let's cheer up," Harris interjected, clapping his hands together. "By the way, is everything okay with you two? Becky isn't causing any trouble, is she?" Mr. Mayer asked. Harris and Nancy glanced at each other and then shook their heads almost in unison. "No, not at all. Everything's fine," the woman replied quickly. "Well, at least that's good news," the businessman said, smiling with relief. "What are the doctors saying?" Harris quickly shifted the conversation in a different direction. "Oh, nothing good. I've been lying here for days with no relief," Mr. Mayer grumbled. "They say I need surgery, but honestly, I'm scared." "Why?" The driver raised an eyebrow. "You've never been afraid, have you?" "Well, Becky consulted some specialists and then called me. She said I might not need this procedure because of my age and weakened body. She's convinced me to look for alternative treatments." "I did some research as well, or rather, I read on the internet," Nancy interrupted. "For your illness, there are no alternative treatments, just surgery." "But why did Becky suggest waiting?" The businessman frowned. "I'm not sure, but I also haven't heard about a high mortality rate. In fact, they say it's a relatively simple operation. It's often performed successfully, with only a small percentage of lethal outcomes, even for patients your age." "I think you should follow the doctor's recommendations." Harris joined his girlfriend. They looked at each other, clearly understanding Becky's motives. It was clear she intended to claim the family fortune and was dissuading her father from effective treatment with the hope of his demise. "It's still a little scary," Mr. Mayer admitted, shaking his head. "I understand what you're going through. Anyone would be afraid in this situation, but you're strong. You'll get through this," Nancy encouraged him with a smile. I agree. You've always been brave. Look at the empire you've built. Confront your illness head-on, or it will consume you, Harris advised. Perhaps you're right. Maybe it's worth a try, the businessman said weakly. Later that day, Mr. Mayer had a comprehensive discussion with the doctor, learning all the details and finally agreeing to proceed with the preparations. Do not worry. Our clinic is top-notch. We have first-class specialists and the best equipment in the country. We will ensure the highest quality care. You won't notice any difference, the doctor assured him after getting his signature on the documents. I hope so. I don't care about any money, as long as the treatment helps. That's the spirit. They say you can't buy health, but you can certainly invest in it. The surgery was scheduled for the following week. Despite his attempts to stay calm, Mr. Mayer could not help but feel nervous as the date approached. However, the excitement was in vain. The surgeons did a fantastic job, successfully resolving the issue that had been limiting the businessman's heart function. Thank you, my dears, for convincing me to do it. It really worked. Mr. Mayer smiled cheerfully at Nancy and Harris. But why do you both look so grim? You see, here's the thing, Nancy began hesitantly. I'm sorry if this sounds harsh, Mr. Mayer, but your daughter has interfered in your business. She even convinced the board of directors that you were incurable. Harris didn't hold back. What? The businessman asked, taken aback. I'm sorry, but it's true, admitted the former maid. You should have seen how angry she was when she found out the operation was successful. It can't be, Mr. Mayer gasped. Sadly, it's true. We didn't want to tell you, but you were going to find out today anyway. It's better you hear it from us. Harris shook his head. She's cunning. She did everything she could to get what she wanted. She has transferred ownership of the house to herself and moved all the accounts and details. She became the sole owner of all the property. How can that be? We're family, Mr. Mayer whispered, his lips barely moving. The chamber door suddenly swung open, revealing a furious Becky. Her eyes sparkled with anger and her superiority, like lightning in a storm. Ah, great, everyone's here. Congratulations on the successful surgery, but it doesn't change anything. I'm the boss now, she hissed. Daughter. Shut up, old man. Why couldn't you just lie there and let me live peacefully? You're always dissatisfied with me, always meddling in my business. But now you can live wherever you want because I'm the boss. Are you trying to throw me out of my own house? Mr. Mayer exclaimed. It's mine now, and you can go wherever you want. With that, Becky turned on her heels and stormed out of the room. A tense silence fell over the room. No one knew how to respond to what had just happened. What am I going to do now? Mr. Mayer sighed, his voice filled with sorrow. The last money from my personal account went towards the operation. I can't even afford a hotel until I'm well enough to undo what Becky's done. No hotels, Nancy said without hesitation. Now pack up. Take what you have and let's go to my place. My house is big enough. My mother and son live with me, but they won't mind. It feels awkward. Why do you need me there? Mr. Mayer started to refuse. No objections at all. Harris will drive us. Don't even think about resisting. I'm sorry, but I'm stronger than you right now. Nancy's eyebrows knitted together menacingly. You've got a very spirited girlfriend, Mr. Mayer chuckled, looking at Harris. So, you knew we were dating? But how? The driver asked, bewildered. I was having heart problems, not eyesight problems. You two are so affectionate, always together. I knew exactly that such wonderful people had to be together. I knew it the moment I saw our lovely Nancy. That's great, she responded with a joyful smile. Packing took quite a bit of time. Mr. Mayer's belongings easily fit into a single suitcase, as he only brought necessities to the hospital. "Come in. Be careful, there's a step here," Nancy cautioned, leading the former chief to the porch.
"My dear, I'm not made of glass. Don't worry, everything is fine. It's just a little bit more, and you'll put me in the wheelchair."
Mr. Mayer smiled warmly. "I keep thinking you're struggling after the surgery," Nancy admitted, embarrassed.
"He's just lost a little weight. His rehabilitation period is now over. He will get a fresh air here, and soon he'll be back in shape in no time. Our Mr. Mayer is not one to give up,"
Harris said energetically.
"Is your mother okay with my visit?"
the businessman clarified. "She's delighted. It provides her some entertainment. It gets lonely when I'm at work. Plus, she will certainly enjoy the company of such a gallant and imposing man."
Nancy giggled. "Well, that's one way to put it," said Mr. Mayer, embarrassed. "Let's go say hello then."
The young woman moved towards her mother's room and carefully opened the door. "Are you awake?" she asked. "Of course, come in," the mother answered from behind the door. Suddenly a ringing voice made Mr. Mayer flinch. Oddly enough, the intonation seemed strikingly familiar, as if... Nancy opened the door, revealing her mother sitting in an armchair by the window. "How do you do? Pardon for me sitting. It's hard for me to stand. My name is—"
"Eleanor,"
the businessman interjected. He froze on the threshold, examining the familiar figure with disbelief. The woman's blonde hair, blue eyes, that hadn't dimmed with age. Nancy's mother had managed to maintain her elegance and beauty, emanating a unique aura of wisdom.
"Sam?"
the woman said in surprise.
"But how did you find me?" "You have no idea. It's a long story,"
the businessman exhaled, timidly stepping closer. "Do you two know each other?" Nancy asked, puzzled. "Yes, daughter," Eleanor smiled. "This is the same groom from my youth that I told you about. What's more, he is your own father."
"What?"
All present interrogated in one voice.
"Wait, but how? Is it really true?"
Mr. Mayer muttered. He sat opposite Eleanor, gently held her fingers and kissed them.
"Where did you disappear to, my love?"
"You see, everything happened too quickly back then. My father, do you remember him? He was always against our relationship. The day I finally mustered the courage to elope with you, he somehow found out. He whisked me away to another city and practically imprisoned me there. It was only later, when it was too late, that I discovered I was pregnant with Nancy. My father wouldn't let me contact you then, insisting we'd raise my daughter ourselves. Then events spiraled. Pregnancy, mum's death, adult life. Everything changed so drastically, and I couldn't find you anymore."
"My poor girl, how did you cope?"
Mr. Mayer sighed sorrowfully.
"Well, it wasn't easy, but Nancy always gave me the strength not to give up."
Eleanor smiled.
"Everything will be fine now. We're finally together," said the man confidently. "What a twist!" Harris whistled.
"Wait, I didn't understand anything. Are you serious about Mr. Mayer being my father?" Nancy asked, standing frozen, as if afraid to forget the sudden news she had heard. She didn't dare look directly at the man she thought she knew well, yet in reality knew not at all. "Yes, it's true, and the fact that you have met is a true miracle," her mother confirmed. "We're all together, at last." Nancy sobbed happily, rushing to embrace her parents. A strange warmth filled Mr. Mayer's chest, bringing a sense of tranquility.
"Do I have to ask you for your wedding blessing, Chief?"
Harris teased, lightening the mood and drawing laughter from everyone present. Several weeks passed since their reunion. The family began settling into village life, managing their own household. Nancy returned to her old job,
while Harris found work as a driver on the same farm. "Well, will you manage here without us?" Nancy asked. "What will happen to us?" Mr. Mayor responded with a grin. "Well, you're not used to it, I suppose, in the village. Not a city or a rich mansion, after all," Nancy shrugged. "Not a mansion. It's even better. Here, you know, the air is different," Mr. Mayor replied, inhaling a full breath. He had fully recovered from the operation, regaining his old self, and now he didn't look like an old man at all, flaunting a trim figure and noble grey hair. "This place is good for both body and soul. Nothing superfluous. Everything as it should be," Mr. Mayor said thoughtfully. "You know, I don't even regret my wealth. I created my business for your mother, to find her, but I couldn't. Who knew that a mere accident would bring us together?" "Accidents are not accidents, dear," said Eleanor, coming up behind him. Her health, too, had improved lately. She was getting up more often, moving around the house more confidently. She and Mr. Mayor even began to go for walks around the house, which Nancy was truly glad about. "But so much labour has gone into your business," Harris shrugged. "Exactly, labour. I'm so tired from living alone that now every day feels like a holiday. Yes, I don't have money, but my illness has finally receded. The woman I love is with me. My daughter married a good man. What more could you want?" "Maybe you're right," Harris replied with an embarrassed smile. "I wonder how Becky is doing," Nancy suddenly asked. "Don't mention that name," grumbled Harris. "Didn't she cause us enough trouble?" "I just feel sorry for her. She did all those bad things out of loneliness and resentment against the world and herself," Nancy replied. "You're too kind." Harris shook his head. "Everyone should have a second chance," Nancy insisted. Suddenly there was an unexpected knock at the door. The early hour didn't suggest visitors, as most of the village's population would be at work on a weekday. "Are you expecting someone?" Nancy asked her parents. "No, maybe it's the neighbours, but we agreed to meet in the evening. Everyone has their own business in the morning," Mum replied doubtfully. Nancy went to the front door and saw— "Wow, what a surprise!" she exclaimed. "There's been a lot of coincidences lately." "Don't tell me there's—" But Harris didn't have time to finish. Nancy opened the door and everyone saw Becky modestly shuffling from foot to foot. "Hello," she said quietly, too scared to look up. "Why did you come here?" asked Harris. "Well, Harris, why are you so rude?" Nancy intervened, cutting her husband off. "Maybe something's happened." "What does it matter to us?" "Please stop it," Nancy retorted. Mr. Mayor stared at the back of the room, uncertain of how to act. He had long forgiven his daughter for her past mistakes and desired to reconnect with her, but he was unsure how to tell Becky about Eleanor. He feared that his newfound relationship would be seen as a betrayal of Becky's mother's memory. However, he also didn't want to keep his first love in the secret from Becky. "What's wrong, daughter?" he finally asked, daring to step out of the shadows. "Dad, I'm such a fool!" Becky suddenly sobbed. "Forgive me!" Unable to bear the stances directed at her, the young woman broke down in tears. Large tears rolled down her cheeks, smearing her expensive mascara. "I thought I could do it. And She attempted to explain, but her sobs choked her words. She covered her face with her hands, trying to hide her emerging weakness. "It's all right. Everything will be okay," Nancy said softly as she approached her. She gently hugged Becky, pulling her close. Mr. Mayor joined them immediately, aiming to comfort the troubled girl. "Why are we in the hallway? Let's move to the living room. Come on in," Eleanor said, smiling warmly at the guest. "Forgive me for intruding like this," Becky sobbed, beginning to calm down. "What happened?" Nancy asked. Nothing that my father didn't warn me about, Becky shrugged. Running a huge company isn't as easy as I thought. I almost foolishly ruined the business, pushing it to the brink of bankruptcy.
What about the board of directors? Weren't they supposed to help you? Mr. Mayor asked, raising an eyebrow.
I argued with them all at first, and then everyone wanted a piece of it, and they started to break up the whole company.
So, you came to surrender?
Harris asked. Nancy elbowed him immediately, but he had already realised his blunder.
Dad, forgive me. I was such a fool, just impossible.
Becky sobbed again.
Of course I forgive you, daughter. I forgave you long ago. I understand everything. I was once young and impertinent myself.
Thank you.
But there's one condition.
The businessman looked at his daughter seriously. What? Becky looked at her father in surprise, clearly surprised by his words.
First of all, we need to settle all the problems to the end. I know that you and Nancy had a conflict, and I would like you to accept her.
Of course. I've wanted to do it for a long time.
I haven't finished yet. I would like you to accept her as your half-sister.
What do you mean? Becky interjected, not understanding.
Look, it's a long story. I hope you're old enough to understand it properly. Even before I met your mum, I met Eleanor. She gave birth to Nancy, who is my daughter too. So it turns out you have a half-sister that we didn't know about all these years.
Becky looked at the woman she had despised not so long ago, and shyly lowered her eyes. She now deeply regretted her rash actions. Please, forgive me for all those harsh words, she whispered. I know I've caused you much pain. I promise it won't happen again.
Don't worry, I understand, smiled Nancy.
Still, it might do you good to work among ordinary people, to experience the demands of rural labour,
Harris noted.
That's not a bad idea, Mr. Mayor agreed. Let's make it a condition. 6 months of work on a local farm. That'll serve as both your probation period and a lesson.
I'll do anything, Becky agreed, bowing her head. I'll try my hardest. Hey, Dad. Working hard, I see, Nancy said as she walked into the office.
Huh? What? What time is it? Mr. Mayor asked, setting aside his papers.
Ever since he had to step back into the company, he had been spending more time in the office, sorting out the chaos created by Becky. You've forgotten all about us, Nancy replied with feigned resentment. It's evening already. Even the staff have long since gone.
Oh well, I'm coming now.
The businessman began to pack fussily, occasionally looking for some papers. All right. I knew you were doing something important. Here, at least eat, or you'll get skinny again, her daughter sympathetically offered, placing a container of homemade food on the table.
Thank you.
After setting out the dinner, Nancy sat down next to her father. She really wanted to assist him, but she didn't understand the difficult economic intricacies of his company. And the only one who had some understanding in these matters, Becky, was still testing her skills on the farm. Now, Becky, it's been 3 months. She hasn't given up yet. Mr. Mayor seemed to have read her thoughts. She's hanging in there. She's doing really well. No one expected her to make it. You know,
not bad at all for a city dweller, of course.
You're both good. You're both strong, the businessman said proudly. By the way, the repairs at my mum's house are almost finished. Thank you for paying for everything. It's so beautiful there. Just like a fairy tale.
Come on, you're my family. What kind of bills can there be? Nothing's too expensive for you.
And one more thing? Nancy smiled mysteriously, then lowered her eyes and stroked her stomach. Only now the businessman noticed the change in his daughter's figure, the noticeable roundness of her belly. After the wedding with Harris, things just happened. We didn't really plan it, but now we're very happy.
You, my darlings. I'm so happy.
Mr. Mayor jumped up from the table and hugged his daughter. The realization that their family was about to change made his heart flutter with joy. anticipating happy troubles.
Penny was determined and organised from an early age. She grew up in a poor family. Her mother was a primary school teacher, and her father worked as an operator at the local thermal power plant. Though they had enough for essentials, luxuries were unreachable. Penny loved her parents dearly, yet as she grew older, she developed mixed feelings about their lifestyle. She saw how they missed opportunities and seemed resistant to growth, mechanically going to their modest jobs, complaining about the government and accepting their lot in life. At times she felt pity for them, but Penny knew one thing with certainty: she would forge a different path. After completing high school, she enrolled in the economics department at the local university. By her 4th year, she had opened her own children's dance school, winning a city startup competition that provided substantial municipal funding for business development. Despite her youth, Penny recognized this as her golden opportunity and seized it wholeheartedly. She immersed herself in every aspect of the business, mastering the nuances, managing accounts, handling advertising, and promoting growth, all while completing her university studies. Sleep became a luxury during those demanding months. Yet she persevered, earning her diploma while launching her business. After graduation, she could finally dedicate herself fully to her project. She had dreamed of studying dance as a child, but her family couldn't afford the expensive lessons and performance costumes. This experience inspired her to secure sponsors who provided her students with beautiful stage outfits in exchange for advertising. As an advocate for accessible education, she obtained subsidies, enabling children from low-income families to attend free of charge. Many of these students became stellar performers who enhanced the school's reputation and served as living testimonials. Penny's innovative ideas for the school's development constantly bore fruit. Seasoned business partners attributed her success to instinct, but the truth was simpler. She genuinely loved her work. When Penny recognized the need to expand, she opened several satellite locations throughout the city. As her modest dance studio evolved into something bigger, she needed trusted support. She appointed her childhood friend Veronica as director, fresh from her graduation from the management department. Veronica possessed the same qualities that had driven Penny's success: organization, meticulousness, responsibility, sharp intelligence, and attention to detail. The similarities and long-standing friendship convinced Penny that Veronica, despite her youth, was ideal for the role of right hand. Most importantly, Penny knew she could trust her. Veronica did prove worthy of her trust, diving into the work immediately. She spent late nights at the office, asking questions, reviewing documents, and mastering operations. With more time to implement new ideas, Penny's business flourished. Within 2 years of opening her first school, she could afford a flat in an upscale neighbourhood and a new car straight from the showroom. She finally enjoyed life's pleasures that had been unreachable in her childhood: luxury resorts, designer clothing, restaurant meals. The latter became necessary as her busy schedule left little time for cooking. 10 years after graduation, plans emerged for a class reunion. Social media made it easier to locate former classmates. Penny looked forward to the gathering, proud of her accomplishments, which likely surpassed those of her peers. Some had once mocked Veronica for wearing hand-me-downs from her cousins. Now they would see her transformed. The reunion proved joyful and intimate, with genuine interest in reconnecting and reminiscing. The former classmates discovered that most of them had married, many with multiple children. Proud parents showed photos of their little ones. Penny felt a twinge of melancholy. She, too, wanted a family, but her business had consumed her early years, and now, as a successful entrepreneur, she worried about attracting fortune hunters. She had heard too many cautionary tales. Anyway, at the reunion she met him, Paul, the class comedian, a charismatic joker, Penny's first love, though he never knew it himself. Penny was a typical quiet girl at school. She studied well, spent
all her time on lessons and extracurricular activities, and rarely joined class outings to the cinema or skating rink. She didn't belong to the class elite, but Paul was at its head. Everyone loved him for his sparkling sense of humour and adventurous spirit. It was always fun with him, though he barely passed his classes. He might have had the ability, but he preferred partying to studying. At school, Paul could charm even the teachers. Thanks to his natural charisma and ability to influence people, he graduated without trouble. High school student Penny watched him from afar. She never dreamed he would notice her. His romantic conquests were legendary. She was drawn to his easy confidence, self-assurance, and undeniably attractive appearance. He only spoke to her when he needed to copy homework. Penny never refused. Even this small interaction was better than nothing. At the reunion restaurant, he looked as charismatic and charming as ever. Age had made him even more attractive. The women brightened in his presence. Former classmates, even those with children or heavily pregnant, tried to catch his attention with questions and laughed too loudly at his jokes. After 10 years, some things hadn't changed. Yet Paul himself had grown more serious. Yes, he still joked cleverly and created a light atmosphere at the table, but now he skillfully deflected excessive attention from tipsy ladies without causing their offence. In school, he had never missed a chance to tease his classmates. This new mature Paul appealed to Penny even more. After 10 years, her feelings hadn't changed much. She still felt shy around him. She still wanted to be near him, to see his sly blue eyes, catch his smile, admire the dimples in his cheeks. And now, Paul finally noticed her. Penny often caught him gazing at her, mesmerized. She knew she looked much better than she had in school. Stylish clothes, skillful makeup, gym workouts and regular beauty treatments had worked wonders. Though she was used to compliments, none affected her like the sincere interest in Paul's eyes. He worked as a chief engineer at a local oil company, earning well enough to afford expensive watches and designer clothes. The charming former classmate wasn't married yet, nor planning to be. He had career plans that prevented him from starting a family at this time. After the restaurant, Paul invited Penny for a walk through the night city. They walked and talked for hours. His voice mesmerized her. Soon, Paul and Penny began dating. Within months, he had moved into her apartment. Then they married at the registry office. No boring wedding and crowds of guests. That was Paul's decision. Why organise a celebration for people neither of us knows well? Let's make it special just for us. The newlyweds chose a warm seaside holiday instead. It was romantic and unforgettable. Gentle waves, hot sun, excellent service. And there he was, her beautiful beloved man, a fairy tale, a dream come true. Penny felt happy. She tried to ignore the fact that Paul had lost his high position at the company a week ago. A honeymoon wasn't the time for sad thoughts. Management had changed, and naturally the director had installed his own people in key positions. Penny understood. She would have done the same, but it didn't matter. Paul was a skilled specialist. He wouldn't be jobless for long. He wasn't some fortune hunter, the type successful Penny had always feared. Paul was different, educated, successful, reliable. Back home, Penny threw herself into her work with renewed energy. As usual, she overflowed with interesting ideas. Paul started job hunting, but unsuccessfully. Nothing suitable appeared. Penny didn't pressure her beloved. They had enough money. She knew how important professional fulfillment was for a man. She supported her husband completely. Her subordinates and partners knew she had married, and naturally, they were curious about her choice. "What does he do?" asked Larry, one of the investors. They had known each other for years and were meeting about regional educational development. "He's an engineer, but temporarily unemployed. By the way, would your company have any suitable positions? He has excellent experience and references." "No vacancies at present, but if he's as qualified as you say, he won't stay unemployed long." "That's what I thought, but it's proving difficult for him to find work. It's been 6 months." 6 months? Larry's eyebrows shot up. 6 months living off you?" he interrupted sharply.
Penny had no response. "That's how it is. For 6 months, she has been the sole breadwinner of their young family." Penny felt neither sorry nor burdened. Everyone goes through hard times. Spouses should support each other. And yet, something didn't feel right. Penny regretted being too open with Larry.
"Don't you think he's using you?"
Larry had the right to ask such a question. He and Penny had been not just business partners, but almost friends for years. About 3 years ago, Larry confessed that he liked Penny very much, not as a partner, not even as a friend, but as a woman. He suggested they try to start a relationship. Penny immediately refused. Though this could have harmed their cooperation, Larry didn't stir any romantic feelings in her. He was too pragmatic, calculating and serious, just like herself. She was attracted to quite different men, cheerful, light-hearted, charming men like Paul. Larry then proposed they forget about his words and continue communicating as if nothing had happened. Penny agreed with pleasure. Surprisingly, no awkwardness or tension lingered between them afterward. "Larry, what are you saying? He's not using me. When we started dating, Paul was on a roll. Should I dump him now that he's in trouble? At the first sign of difficulty?" However, Penny understood that something had to be done urgently. Even if he couldn't get as prestigious a position as before, he needed to earn something, to do anything. It was becoming embarrassing in front of acquaintances. In their eyes, Paul truly looked like a kept man. So Penny began to offer her husband options. "Maybe you could come work at my school."
"As whom?" Paul snorted. "A ballet master or something?"
"Why a ballet master?" His spouse smiled. "A safety engineer, part-time."
"Me? A former chief engineer of an oil company?"
The man was insulted.
"Don't talk nonsense. I'm already in a career slump, and you're only worsening it."
"What's wrong with it? Work part-time and look for a position you like. You'll have plenty of time."
"Have you thought about my feelings? What will my ex-colleagues say? The mistress has arranged a cosy position for her useless husband. I'll feel like a dependent there. How can I respect myself after that?"
Penny considered this. There was some truth in her spouse's words, yet something had to be done about their situation. "Maybe you could try opening your own business. I'll provide start-up money. Think of an idea and we'll discuss business plans."
"So you want to become my investor?"
Paul clarified. He looked interested. "Well, yes. I have some spare savings, if you—"
"I've got an idea."
Her husband interrupted her with a happy smile.
"I've been wanting to open a cafe for a long time. I'll start working on a business plan right away."
"That's wonderful," Penny rejoiced. She liked seeing her husband so enthusiastic. As promised, Penny gave Paul money for development. Now he was rarely home, spending all his time at the cafe. He told Penny everything was going great, and he was sincerely grateful to Penny for her support. Paul had money now, and he bought a car on credit and began giving his wife gifts, both for occasions and spontaneously. Penny couldn't help but be pleased with her husband. She was proud to tell others that Paul was a businessman. But the idyll ended quickly. Not even 6 months had passed when Paul came home in a gloomy mood.
"That's it," he said. "I've gone bust. Competitors have finished me off, framed me, cited various authorities on me. They're shutting me down, and now I have a pile of debts."
"How?" Penny gasped. "Why didn't you come to me for help? This disaster didn't happen overnight. Maybe it could have been prevented."
"What does it matter now?" Paul waved his hand. "I wanted to handle it myself like a man. You already gave me the money to open the business. Should I hide behind your skirt for every problem? I thought I could manage it myself. I couldn't."
So, Paul stayed home again. He resumed his job search, which yielded no results. Penny decided to investigate what had happened to her husband's business, without his knowledge. It turned out Paul had barely invested in its development, even violating sanitary regulations. This business was doomed from the start. Strange. Penny was perplexed. She had given Paul enough money to open a proper business. Where had he put it? Had he spent it so carelessly? That explained the gifts and his expensive purchases. Penny knew some people aren't suited for entrepreneurship. It seemed her husband was one of them. It was disappointing but bearable. Worse were the debts that now burdened Paul. Every month, Penny had to give him a substantial sum to partially repay them. Paul looked depressed. Penny felt sorry for him. She couldn't imagine how she would feel in his position. He tried to be helpful, cleaning the house and cooking delicious dinners. Penny loved coming home to such comfort, but she understood this couldn't continue indefinitely. It's vital for a man to feel like a provider, a master, the head of the family. Her spouse's depressed state proved that the role of cook and cleaner clearly didn't suit him. Another year passed. During this time, Paul hadn't found work. People in Penny's circle openly told her she had married a kept man. Larry was especially harsh. "What kind of husband is this? Not a husband, but a domestic servant," he resented. "I can't imagine it. A man who doesn't earn. I've been working since I was 15, and look at him." "He's going through a difficult period," Penny defended her spouse. "Nobody's immune." "This period has gone on too long. Do you really need such a relationship? Can't you see? He's latched onto you, lives off your provision, drives a nice car. Really, there is no need to work to him." "Larry, stop it," the woman snapped, but she couldn't find any arguments in Paul's favour. Then everything suddenly changed. Paul began leaving the house for long periods. He had money again. Her husband's mood had clearly improved. He was smiling again. "Honey, I didn't want to tell you ahead of time. I've started doing phone consultations for money. I have extensive experience. I'm a high-end specialist, so my advice isn't cheap." "That's wonderful," Penny rejoiced. "You've finally found work that suits you." "This is just the beginning. Maybe later I'll open my own agency. I have big plans." "No, not that," the woman exclaimed hastily. She still remembered her husband's cafe experience. The monthly debt payments remained fresh in her mind. "You don't think I can do it?" Paul was clearly offended. "Do you think you're the only capable business person?" No, not at all." Penny was flustered. "It's just that business isn't for everyone. You've got a lot to learn." "I'll figure it out." Paul snapped and left for the bedroom. Penny regretted not holding her tongue. She seemed to have seriously hurt her husband's feelings. One day, Penny arrived at her office at an unusual hour. She was supposed to attend a meeting at the mayor's office, but it had been cancelled. She was surprised to see Paul's car at the gate. Has something happened? She wondered, because Paul seldom showed up here. Penny parked, entered the lobby, nodded to the guard and climbed the stairs. On the top landing, she heard voices. Her husband and Veronica talking. "This is the last time I'm giving you money from the safe," her friend announced. "How much more can you take? It's going to become noticeable soon. I can't keep covering for you forever." "Veronica, please," coaxed her husband. "It's for a good cause, you know. Just don't tell Penny anything yet. I don't want her to worry unnecessarily." "Of course I won't either. She won't thank me for such a thing." Veronica paused. "She's strict, that's true. She thinks highly of herself." Penny was shocked and needed time to process what she'd heard and decide how to handle it. Thus, she slipped into the neighbouring accounting department, staying unnoticed, and spent the rest of the day pondering what she'd learned. Paul was taking money from the safe. Not for the first time, judging by the conversation. Veronica was giving it to him and apparently covering the excess spending in the documents. If the amounts weren't too large, that would be easy enough to do. But why? Paul said he needed the money for some good cause. Why could he tell Veronica but not me, his wife? Why would Veronica, usually as dependable as a rock, help Paul behind her back? What was this supposedly good purpose? After wrestling with these questions all day, Penny decided she'd had enough. She entered the director's office. Veronica looked up tiredly. "We need to talk, Veronica. I've always trusted you, you know that." "I know, so what? From your tone, it seems you don't trust me any more." "What's going on?
Why are you regularly giving my husband money from the safe? Why haven't you told me about it?"
"Oh, you found out,"
Veronica said quietly. "Yes, I've given him several sums, but he has serious circumstances." "Like what? Another business venture?"
"Not at all. It's more serious,"
Veronica exhaled. "He asked me not to tell you, but since you know everything, I have to explain. Paul's mother is seriously ill, and he's sending money for her treatment. Without it, she won't survive." Penny sat stunned. She hadn't expected this. She had only met her mother-in-law a couple of times. Paul himself rarely communicated with relatives. His mother had seemed healthy and pleasant to Penny, and now she learned her mother-in-law was seriously ill. So Penny struggled to control her emotions. "He came to you with this trouble, not me." Penny tried to understand it's difficult for him. He's not earning money. He can't find his place. And then to beg you for his mother's treatment. "Is it better to take it behind my back?" Penny shook her head. "Don't give him any more money without my knowledge. I'll talk to him today, and of course I'll transfer the necessary amount for his mother's treatment." At home, everything seemed normal at first. Paul had cleaned, cooked a delicious dinner, and was watching TV on the sofa, looking satisfied. Penny walked over and turned it off. "We're spouses, the closest people to each other," she said, meeting his eyes. "I want no secrets between us. I know about your mother's situation. I can't understand why you told Veronica but not me, your wife. I heard your conversation. And this phone counselling income you mentioned? Was that a lie too?" "I know it wasn't right, but I didn't want to worry you. You've been stressed lately, so I thought I'd handle it quietly. And I'm ashamed," Paul burst out. "I'm a healthy man with no good job or income, dependent on my wife. I can't even help my own mother." Penny felt uncomfortable. She always struggled when Paul showed vulnerability. She even felt guilty about her success, an irrational, unpleasant feeling. "It's okay, calm down." She gently touched his cheek and hugged him. He wrapped his arms around her waist. "I made lasagna for dinner." Paul finally broke the silence. "Want to try it?" "I'd love to, I'm starving. So, how's your mother doing?" "The treatment's working. It's expensive, but the doctors are optimistic." "Should we visit her at the hospital?" "It's too early, it's not allowed yet. I feel terrible about not supporting her at such a moment." "What do you mean? You're providing for her treatment." "Money isn't everything, but it helps. By the way, there's still more to pay." And Paul named a substantial sum. "I'll transfer it tomorrow," Penny promised. Time passed, but little changed. Penny remained devoted to her business. Paul continued his job search. But Penny no longer rushed him now. She understood that her husband needed to take care of his sick mother. She had a serious illness related to loss of immunity. No one except her son, wearing a protective suit, was allowed to visit her. That's what Paul said. He was holding up well. Penny couldn't imagine how she would cope if either of her parents were in that position. To be honest, Penny enjoyed coming home to a clean, cosy flat, filled with the aroma of delicious food. Paul excelled at housework. She realized that once she found employment here, she would miss these comforts. Her relationship with Veronica remained unchanged. Penny had forgiven her friend's moment of weakness, knowing how persuasive Paul could be. Yet her friend's behaviour had subtly shifted. Veronica no longer joined her for lunchtime chats. Their cinema and cafe outings ceased. She cited business and fatigue. Then one morning, Penny found herself unable to get out of bed. Her head spun, dark spots dancing before her eyes. Still, she forced herself up. Despite 8 hours of sleep, she felt exhausted and broken, a state that had persisted for some time. "You look terribly haggard," Larry remarked that day during an unexpected office visit. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" "No, just exhausted. I've been dealing with school problems lately, plus developing a new project." "I see you're exhausted, and Paul's lying on the sofa, taking care of himself." "Larry, please don't start. I'm sick of it. I'm worried about you, the man admitted. I don't like your pallor. When was your last vacation? I can barely remember. Go to the sanatorium at the seacoast. My sister recently had a wonderful time in one of them with her children. There's rest, the sea, and excellent doctors who can examine you. Maybe you're lacking vitamins. Take at least a week for yourself, or you'll burn out completely. You know, maybe you're right. I'm definitely right, Larry smiled. Here's their card. Call them today, now. And Penny did travel to the sanatorium. Larry had been right. The exhausted woman enjoyed the deserted beaches, swam in the pool, and had massages. Her vitality returned, the weakness faded, and the dizziness subsided. Her mirror reflection transformed from pale skin and dark circles to a radiant, cheerful, fresh face. One day by the pool, she noticed two women. The older one bore a striking resemblance to her mother-in-law. Penny looked closer, uncertain because they'd only met Paul's mother twice, and surely she couldn't be here. According to her husband, his mother was still seriously ill in hospital, yet her mother-in-law, for it was indeed her, recognized Penny too. "Hello, dear," the lady smiled, looking anything but sickly. "Is Paul here with you?" "No, he stayed home. I'm alone." "I see. My son told me he's very busy with his own business. With you, he's really stepped up, become clever. I'm glad. I thought nothing would ever change him." "Busy with his business?" Penny grew increasingly puzzled. "And by the way, how's your health?" "I'm fine. I'm in my 60s, of course, but I can't complain." "So you haven't been hospitalized for 6 months? Didn't need expensive treatment?" "I was in hospital, but not for 6 months. I had a circumferential lift. It was expensive, true. My husband paid for it. A 20th wedding anniversary gift. But why these strange questions about my health?" Penny told this pleasant, healthy woman everything. About Paul losing his job, his failed job searches, and the story about money for his mother's treatment. As she spoke, her mother-in-law's expression darkened. "So, he's at it again. Well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. It's in his genes. I can't help it. I feel sorry for you, girl. Leave him before it's too late. At least you don't have children. I'll explain everything, but the story is long and unpleasant." Paul was born from a brief affair between his mother and a visiting university professor. He claimed to be captivated by the young department member's beauty, saying he'd never seen anyone like her. He spoke of kindred spirits and destiny's perfect match. This charming, charismatic man presented himself as unmarried. Paul's mother drove headlong into the passionate relationship, believing his promises of a serious future. But things unfolded differently. She, already imagining their wedding, learned that he had a wife and 3 children in his hometown, with no intention of changing his life. "What's the problem, babe?" he asked shamelessly. "We had fun. You enjoyed it. Don't deny it. If you'd known about my family from the start, none of this would have happened. Who would that have helped?" So he left, and the heartbroken woman soon discovered her pregnancy. When the time came, she delivered a healthy, strong boy. Paul grew into a handsome, charming child with powerful charisma. In school, especially high school, young women went to extraordinary lengths to win Paul's heart. Helen often found herself consoling or calming his passionate admirers. Paul had inherited his father's looks and charm. Unfortunately, the habit of lying was inherited from his careless parent too. He would invent the most incredible facts about his life on the fly, presenting them so convincingly that people, strangely enough, believed him. Paul had an innate power of persuasion. Helen was deeply troubled by this. She saw clearly that her child was a master manipulator. He tried to manipulate her too, but unsuccessfully. When Paul was about 13, his mother married a good, wealthy man who owned a small dairy. Unlike Paul's father, this man was always honest with his wife and supported her in everything. Soon, the family welcomed a daughter. Paul grew jealous and invented such heart-wrenching stories that the guardianship authorities nearly sent him to an orphanage. After this incident, the teenager realized he had gone too far and became more careful. Over time, he perfected his art of lying and manipulation. These skills helped him graduate from university, but he had no desire to work. He tried employment briefly but disliked it. Instead, Paul chose to live at others' expense, begging money from his stepfather, deceiving friends and relatives. Eventually, he learned to live off wealthy women who were willing to support a handsome young man with a terrific sense of humour, blue eyes and charming dimples. His mother was devastated that her son had become such an unworthy person. She blamed herself for failing to raise him properly. Paul lived independently, rarely appearing at home or maintaining family ties. Then one day, he announced his engagement to Penny. Helen was overjoyed, believing he would finally settle down, especially since she took an immediate liking to Penny, an organised, determined young woman who had already achieved much despite her youth. Time passed. From what Helen could tell, Paul's married life seemed fine, though he claimed his wife preferred limited contact with his relatives. Helen accepted this without offence. The important thing was that her son appeared happy and in good hands. When Paul bragged about starting his own business, the woman was initially sceptical. But seeing him with expensive cars, watches, and the latest phones, she believed he had finally straightened out his life. How else could he afford such luxury? And now this chance meeting with her daughter-in-law at the sanatorium happened. I can't believe it," Penny muttered, tears streaming down her face unnoticed. Her world had shattered overnight. The man she had loved since high school, her husband, was nothing but a pathological liar and a con man. She had constantly excused him, pitied him, supported him, while he happily exploited her kindness and her money. "It was hard for me, too, to admit what kind of person my son is," her mother-in-law sighed. "Even harder than it is for you. Get away from him before it's too late. He'll try to convince you otherwise. He'll certainly think of something, but don't listen to him. He isn't trustworthy. I almost envy you. You can cut him out of your life. I can't. He's still my son." "Thank you for being honest," Penny smiled weakly. "I need to go to my room now and think." "Of course." Her mother-in-law's gaze held a mixture of warmth, pity and guilt. Once in her room, Penny collapsed onto the bed and let her emotions flow. She had never cried so hard. The pillow grew so wet with tears, she had to dry it with a hairdryer. From childhood, Paul recognized his main advantages: the ability to charm people and attract attention. Early on, he learned to manipulate others, first his caretakers, then teachers and classmates. The boy knew that if he wanted something from anyone, he would get it effortlessly. It didn't matter what he desired: an extra serving on a meal, rare collectible items, concert tickets, homework help, or the best role in school plays. At first, Paul believed everyone possessed such abilities. To his surprise and delight, he discovered his talents were unique. This realization greatly boosted his self-esteem. His mother remained the only person immune to his influence. Sometimes the boy felt she merely tolerated him rather than loved him. Later he understood. She must have seen his father's traits in him, the man who had broken her heart. Though this hurt Paul, especially in childhood, he eventually stopped caring about his mother's attitude. He received plenty of love and attention from others. He had other relatives too: grandmother, grandfather, and aunt. They adored their handsome, clever boy and indulged him despite his mother's protests. "You'll spoil him," she would argue. "You can't spoil with love," his grandmother would counter. "The boy has no father. He needs extra attention," his grandfather would echo her. His aunt would simply smile affectionately and slip her favourite nephew money for expenses. As Paul grew older, he discovered his talent for entertaining and organising people. Classmates often remarked how fun and easy it was to be around him. He was always the centre of attention. Both athletes
and honours students befriended him. School beauties pursued him relentlessly. Of course, Paul took advantage of his position. Initially, his mother raised him alone. Expensive gaming consoles and seaside vacations were unthinkable luxuries. Then his stepfather, the local dairy owner, entered their lives. Everything changed. They moved into a spacious cottage filled with modern amenities. They flew to seaside resorts annually, staying in luxury hotels and shopping at high-end boutiques. Paul laughed that his stepfather was his golden ticket and used all his charm to win his trust. As usual, he succeeded. The man boasted to everyone about his wonderful stepson. He even planned to pass the business to Paul, who feigned interest in his business, though he neither understood nor cared about it. His stepfather's eyes would light up whenever Paul asked questions about the dairy. Paul dreamed of becoming like him, wealthy, respected, influential, someone others would bow to. But that required effort and work, precisely what Paul despised. However, he attended university at his parents' insistence and even graduated with an engineering degree. He passed it using his usual tactics: charm, lies, and flattery. But the young man never intended to work in his field. When his parents refused to support their adult son financially, thinking it would motivate him, they didn't know he'd been dating Heather. They'd met at a club, a young student and a wealthy, bored, middle-aged widow who had inherited her late husband's fortune. They became lovers. Heather was drawn to his youth and vitality. He was interested solely in her money. And the woman proved generous. She showered him with expensive gifts, watches, clothes, phones. She even rented him an apartment, though she didn't offer to live together, having teenage children who would disapprove. This arrangement delighted Paul. He preferred their occasional romantic encounters. It was more entertaining that way. He told his friends and family he'd landed a position as chief engineer at a local oil company. Helen was immediately sceptical. His stepfather initially believed him, but investigated through his connections and confirmed his wife's suspicions. "I don't know your income source, but you're unemployed," he confronted Paul. "Stay away from my family. You're dangerous, a pathological liar, a parasite living off dishonestly obtained money." "Message received," Paul smirked. "But I don't care." Now, estranged from his family, Paul felt neither remorse nor anxiety. He knew he'd survive. In the worst case, he could apologize to his mother, who would reluctantly accept and support him. She was easy to manipulate through guilt, having birthed a child of an unknown man, never truly loving him, and now losing him to family conflict. Paul understood perfectly that this situation pained his mother. Fine, she'd be his backup plan, though he hoped to avoid needing it. His relationship with Heather ended suddenly. She'd found another handsome man. She left him a generous parting gift, but Paul knew it wouldn't last long, given his expensive lifestyle. Would he finally need to work? This drastic measure proved unnecessary when Cheryl soon replaced Heather. She was an elegant, attractive woman just past 40. Paul even developed unexpected feelings for her. He admired nearly everything about Cheryl: her perfect figure, soft skin, silky hair, easygoing nature, and sense of humour. Her only flaw was her husband, a prominent local businessman. Paul knew discovery of their affair would have serious consequences, which only made their meetings more thrilling. Cheryl seemed to enjoy the secrecy too. Their relationship felt like a game or movie plot. Like Heather, she showed great generosity, giving even more lavish gifts: a car, a studio apartment, luxury resort vacations. But Cheryl too vanished from his life similarly to Heather, moving abroad with her husband. Megan succeeded her. Less wealthy, merely chief accountant at a major local company, lacking her predecessor's sophistication. But this lonely middle-aged woman was also doing anything for a young lover, though Paul quickly tired of her company. Megan suffocated him with her care. They lived together, vacationed together, spent every moment together. She cooked him delicious meals, washed and ironed his shirts, called him silly pet names, and gazed at him with adoring yet condescending eyes. It became unbearable. One day, Paul realized it was time to find a way out. Megan had already introduced him to all her relatives, and her hints about marriage had evolved into explicit requests, almost demands. And then he was invited to a school reunion. Paul prepared meticulously, determined to impress his former classmates. He wore one of the designer suits Cheryl had given him, complemented by an expensive watch, and his appearance had the intended effect. He reclaimed his position as the life of the party and everyone's favourite, just as in school. This feeling delighted him. As for Penny, she caught his attention immediately. She looked radiant with her glowing skin, lustrous hair, and elegant figure. She dressed in stylish subtlety. Paul, knowledgeable about designer clothing, recognised the premium quality of her attire. The absence of a ring indicated she wasn't married. How had she acquired such luxury? She was clearly wealthy now. Through casual conversation, he learned the truth. The former nerd had built the most prestigious dance school in the area. A plan formed instantly in his head. Here was his chance to escape the clingy, ageing Megan. Penny was young, attractive, and far wealthier. Perhaps she could help advance his career. Paul had grown weary of depending on women, but he still wasn't ready for serious work. Seriously. Maybe Penny could offer him a position in her business. Make him a director, perhaps. Thus, Paul unleashed his charm on the unsuspecting Penny. It proved effortless. She doted on Paul, and like his previous partners, was generous with gifts. She sympathised with his fake dismissal from his position as chief engineer at the oil company. He wasn't actually job hunting. His plan to become dance school director had failed. The position wasn't as straightforward as he'd imagined. Veronica often worked late preparing reports. He wanted no part of such responsibilities. Besides, Penny appreciated her friend's work, constantly praising her competence. She wouldn't replace such an expert with someone who knew nothing about the business. For a while, things proceeded smoothly. Penny worked diligently while Paul pretended to job hunt, expressing disappointment with each supposedly rejected opportunity. Then his wife grew more insistent. Moreover, her attitude started to infuriate him. She clearly considered him as servant, the failure, the layabout, while she was the successful businesswoman, the provider, the intelligent and wealthy one. She constantly emphasized her authority and his dependence. Previously, she'd transferred money to his card several times monthly. Now, he had to remind her and invent reasons. It felt degrading. But as always, he found a solution through another woman. Paul had noticed how Veronica looked at him. She'd had a crush on him in school, even confessing it once. Back then, Paul hadn't taken her seriously, just a girl from a poor family with mediocre looks. Why would he need such a girl when there were plenty of bright beauties around? But now everything had changed. Veronica had become the director who handled most of the firm's financial matters. She could help him. Paul began his manipulation carefully, visiting the office and paying attention to Veronica. He would offer compliments, crack jokes, and cast languid looks her way. Like an experienced manipulator, he saw his tactics having the desired effect. Veronica opened up to him more and more. She grew accustomed to speaking with her friend's husband. Paul patiently listened to Veronica's stories about her friends and relatives. Though it tested his patience, he endured her sharing of worries and concerns, managing to insert well-timed responses. Then one day, he received confirmation that it was time to act. "I never thought you were such a sensitive and deep person," Veronica said, looking straight into Paul's eyes. "You acted so differently at school." "We were all fools at school," Paul countered. "I feel like you're my soulmate," the woman confessed. "I have the same feeling." Paul moved closer to Veronica, gazing into her eyes. She swayed slightly toward him. He seized the moment and kissed her. What What are we doing? Veronica whispered, lowering her eyes. It's not right. Penny, if she finds out, she's my friend and boss, by the way.
She won't find out anything. There's no need to worry her, Paul said firmly. She's got enough problems as it is, but I can't help myself.
Neither can I, Veronica admitted. They became lovers. They met mostly at Veronica's flat. Paul assessed the situation with a practiced eye. Clearly, Penny didn't skimp on salaries and bonuses for her right hand. The dance school director lived comfortably, but unlike with his previous conquests, Paul had no intention of living off Veronica. He had more ambitious plans for her. With her help, he planned to take over Penny's business. Though that would take time, he needed money immediately. So Paul invented a story about his sick mother. What a pity, Veronica said, genuinely horrified as she listened to Paul's tear-jerking tale. I'm so sorry for your mother and you, but why don't you ask Penny for money? I know her, she won't refuse. You see, I'm a man, but I'm in a difficult position right now. I was sacked, new management and all that. It's humiliating enough living off my wife. She nags me about every penny, calls me names, and now I need this much money. If you refuse, I'll have to go to her. A mother's life matters more than pride, but... Oh dear. I'll help, Veronica exclaimed eagerly. Paul had, as usual, hit his mark perfectly. A woman's love, seasoned with pity and the desire to care for a loved one. These ingredients created the perfect combination. From then on, Paul began systematically destroying the friendship between the women. His method was simple, casually mentioning offensive remarks his wife had supposedly made about him or Veronica, sharing stories about Penny's contempt for those less fortunate. Skillfully and methodically, he crafted the image of a cold, heartless woman who stepped on others to reach her goals. Sure, she knew how to pretend and please people, but he, her husband, saw her true nature. All this served his long-term plan. If everything worked out, he'd never need to manipulate women for money again. Veronica kept giving him the money for his mother's supposed treatment. Later, Paul planned to tap this cash flow again, but Penny discovered it. She overheard a conversation between him and Veronica. Of course, she seemed to believe him and even provided money for treatment. But a new problem arose. She wanted to visit her mother-in-law. He couldn't keep making excuses about no visitors being allowed anymore. Penny had already started researching the diagnosis and seeking specialists. While Paul pondered his next move, an unexpected solution appeared. Penny decided to rest at a sanatorium, following a colleague's suggestion. This worked perfectly. He had already manipulated Veronica into the right mindset, and she had agreed to prepare documents transferring Penny's business to him. He used all his natural abilities and experience to convince her. We'll finally be together. We'll have everything we need to be happy. Penny can stay on as director with the same salary. I want to be with you. I'm tired of hiding, he persuaded Veronica. Wrestling with her conscience, Veronica slipped the documents in with a stack of routine papers for the unsuspecting Penny to sign. Penny trusted her friend completely. Besides, she felt terrible lately, and thoughts of her upcoming trip occupied her mind. Paul rejoiced. He now owned the entire dance school network. He possessed both a profitable business and Veronica's heart. She knew how to manage it all. What more could he want? Penny would stay at the sanatorium for nearly a month. He had time to establish his own system. To prevent anyone from informing his wife about the changes, he had planned ahead. Before her trip, he hid her phone. He bought her a new one with a different SIM card. Of course, she could have restored her old number, but helpful Paul, who volunteered to solve the problem, conveniently forgot about that option. So his wife departed with a new number, known only to those closest to her, himself and Veronica, and they certainly wouldn't tell her anything. Now in charge, Paul got to work. First, he replaced all management positions. He didn't want his wife's people in his company.
Veronica objected, saying new specialists wouldn't immediately understand all the nuances. They shouldn't move too hastily. But Paul already felt like the owner and was confident he knew best. After all, he had Veronica, the permanent director, who understood everything about the business. Then Paul raised the price of season tickets and cancelled benefits. He started renovations, changed the name of the school, and made numerous decisions that made Veronica's head spin. She had to deal with the consequences of his management. Like at the beginning of her career, she now stayed late at the office, but unlike then, when there were prospects for growth and development, now the director realised a disaster was approaching. Veronica dreaded their upcoming meeting with Penny, but Paul wasn't worried at all. He eagerly awaited his wife's arrival. Soon, a spectacular scene would unfold. His triumph, her defeat. The expression of superiority and smugness would finally vanish from his wife's face. She had gained strength, processed what she had learned from her mother-in-law, and decided to divorce her husband immediately upon return. Penny opened the door with her key and entered the living room. A sleepy Paul emerged from the bedroom. The usual pattern. It was almost noon and he was still in bed. "Welcome back," her husband smiled. "How was your flight?" "Fine," Penny replied coldly. Now her husband disgusted her. How could she ever have loved him? Perceptive, Paul immediately noticed something was wrong. "Did something happen?" "Yes, something happened. We need to have a serious talk." "What a coincidence." His smile widened. "I have something to discuss too." "Did you find a job?" Penny couldn't resist the sarcasm. "Should I congratulate you?" "I love your sense of humour, but congratulations to you." Paul grinned and revealed everything. His relationship with Veronica, their scheming, how he'd become the sole owner of the business, and his first actions in charge. Penny listened and didn't want to believe it, but after her conversation with her mother-in-law, she knew Paul was capable of such things. "Get out," she said tiredly. "I don't want to see you. You didn't take my apartment, did you?" "What would I want with your little shack? I've already got my eye on a 2-story flat downtown. I just wanted to welcome you properly. Wanted to tell you myself. See your reaction." "Well, you've seen it. Pack your bags and go." "I'm already packed. Just a few things left." Paul left. Penny sat on the sofa, hugged her knees, and thought. Her dance school. Her brainchild. Her treasure. Paul had stolen it all from her. He'd taken everything and would destroy it. No doubt about that. He already had. And Veronica? Fine. Paul seemed unhinged, but how could she do this? He couldn't have managed it without her. Had she fallen for his charm? What now? What could she do? Let it go? No, absolutely not. Penny wanted Paul to suffer, to feel everything she felt now, but multiplied. She began to strategize. What did Paul love most in the world? Money, of course, and the luxurious lifestyle it provided. She would ensure her soon-to-be ex-husband, she'd file the papers today, would end up penniless, and preferably in debt. Larry had been secretly in love with Penny since their first meeting at City Hall. The young, determined woman had impressed him with her enthusiasm, energy, and organizational skills. Still in university, she'd already opened a dance school. The young entrepreneur's unconventional yet practical decisions impressed him. He could learn much from her. Though inexperienced in business initially, she needed support. Larry became one of her investors, less for profit than for the chance to meet her, speak with her, see her beautiful brown eyes. The more he knew her, the more he admired her. No trace of flirtation, no hint of arrogance, just constructive dialogue. A sharp mind paired with excellent humour. They gradually grew closer, becoming good friends over years of collaboration. But Larry wanted more. One day he confessed his feelings to Penny, but she didn't reciprocate. Though deeply hurt, he respected her decision. He suggested
they forget his confession and continue as before, not wanting any awkwardness between them. Friends would remain friends. Penny seemed to like this idea. She agreed with pleasure, and neither mentioned that conversation again. Later, Larry couldn't comprehend her choice. Yes, Paul had charisma, but how could Penny not see she'd married a physical fortune hunter? She was brilliant, perceptive, sensitive and strong. She wouldn't have survived in business otherwise. Larry had tried discussing her husband with her several times, but she'd always reacted defensively, so he'd dropped the subject. Then something incredible happened. Penny vanished, reportedly to a seaside resort, but first transferred the business to her husband, who immediately began destroying the enterprise she'd devoted her life to. Larry sensed something was wrong and anxiously awaited her return. He'd considered filing a missing person report if she didn't appear within weeks. It all seemed too suspicious. Penny gone, her phone off, while Paul and Veronica did what they pleased with her life's work. Then Penny called. "Where did you disappear to?" Larry felt immense relief. He'd been worried sick about her. "I was at a sanatorium. Are you aware of what's happening?" "Yes," Penny replied grimly. "How did you let this happen? Why give him the business?" "Larry, the people I trusted have betrayed me. You were right about Paul. He's a scoundrel. I really need your help now." "Anything," Larry promised. "I could start by punching him." "No need for that, though I wanted to myself at first. I need a different kind of support, and quickly, before that fool entirely ruins everything. I have a plan." Larry listened to Penny's ideas and smiled. "He'd better not cross your path." "He'd better not," the woman agreed. Meanwhile, Paul realized things weren't going as planned. He had expected huge profits after implementing his changes. He had raised prices and cut wages. But reality proved different. Quality teachers were quitting. The staff was dissatisfied with the new management strategy. No one wanted to work for meagre pay, especially since there were plenty of opportunities for skilled choreographers elsewhere. Soon, both teachers and students began leaving, with few newcomers taking their place. The high price of season tickets scared potential clients away. They had to deplete their reserves to cover rent and utilities, even taking out a high-interest loan. When they applied for another loan, they were rejected. Meanwhile, Veronica kept stirring up trouble. She pestered them daily with reports. Paul didn't bother looking into them. He knew nothing good would come of it. Then one day, an investor named Larry appeared in his office. He introduced himself as someone interested in meeting the school's new owner and inquired about the business. Paul openly shared their financial difficulties. After some consideration, the investor made an irresistible offer. Paul would take out another substantial loan and invest it in Larry's company. "In just a month, you'll be making solid profits. Then I'll invest in you again." That's precisely how Penny and I worked together, hand in hand, though doing business with a man is even more pleasant. Paul followed the visitor's advice without hesitation, despite Veronica's warnings about Larry's connection to Penny. "You can't trust him completely," she insisted. "He's Penny's man." "Oh, be quiet, I've had enough," he snapped. "Who's the boss here, me or you? He's a decent guy, everything will be fine." But Paul couldn't have been more wrong. A month passed, and not only did the promised profits fail to materialize, but everything fell apart. Larry's company, where Paul had invested substantial borrowed funds, went bankrupt, unexpected. Paul found himself drowning in debt, most of which fell on his own shoulders. Then came unexpected inspections from tax and labor authorities. They uncovered numerous violations, with responsibility falling directly on him as manager. Paul was devastated. This was a complete disaster. He'd thought taking over an established business would make him rich. Instead, he had acquired a mountain of problems. Bailiffs harassed him, and he could barely afford food. Thankfully, he still had luxuries from his former life. He had to sell everything: designer suits, expensive watches, his apartment.
his car. Parting with his fancy car proved especially difficult. This aesthete and lover of luxury now lived in a tiny, long-ago renovated apartment in a remote district, riding the bus everywhere. With almost no money left, he had to job hunt. Despite his experience, finding even a low-paying position proved challenging, with his sparse employment history. As he'd done before, Paul tried finding a wealthy woman to support him. Veronica was no longer an option. Buried in her own debts, she'd sold her upscale apartment and car, moving back in with her mother. People said she was depressed, but Paul didn't care. He'd never learned to feel compassion or form real attachments. Yet no woman appeared willing to take in this supposedly handsome, charismatic man. Paul wasn't the catch he once was. His good looks and natural charm had worked their magic. Now, his carefully cultivated image held little appeal to potential romantic interests. Then Larry reappeared, elegant, successful, wealthy as ever. He claimed these things happen. Sometimes companies fail. Feeling guilty, he offered to buy Paul's failing business. The price was insulting, but better than nothing, Paul reasoned. It would cover some designer clothes, spa treatments, and entry to an exclusive nightclub. Perhaps luck would smile on him again. Maybe he'd meet a wealthy woman. This time he'd be smarter, more careful. When the time came to sign the papers, Paul went to the buyer's office. Imagine his shock when he found his ex-wife there with Larry. Penny looked stunning, lounging confidently in an armchair with a gentle smile. The truth hit Paul like a thunderbolt. He'd been played. Digging a pit for others, you can easily fall in yourself. Penny smirked, extending the contract to her ex-husband. Sign here and return what's rightfully mine. You have no idea how long it'll take to repair the damage you've done. In just a couple of months, you nearly destroyed my life's work. You'll manage, Larry said confidently, speaking only to Penny, entirely ignoring Paul. I won't sign, Paul retreated, hoping to spite his smug ex-wife while he still could. Your choice, Larry finally acknowledged him, but your debts grow daily. They're all in your name. Soon you'll face more than fines. You'll go to prison. Heart aching, Paul signed. He knew he had no choice. Penny would resurrect the business. There was no doubt about that. As for him, well, perhaps his parents could help. His stepfather was doing well, after all. It was worth a try.
Mr. Harwood emerged from his slumber slowly, as if reluctant to return to this world, yearning to stay in the realm of sleep. Outside the window it was overcast, and rain drummed against the glass, bringing sadness and longing. At such moments one feels apathy, especially when unwell and uncertain about surviving until tomorrow. His body refused to cooperate. When he tried to raise his arm, it held no strength, and within minutes it would dangle lifelessly off the bed. Everything had been so different before. Mr. Harwood had always taken care of himself, going for morning jogs year-round, regardless of weather. Hot or cold, what did it matter? After exercising, his body had been filled with vigour, unlike now, when he lay helpless as a vegetable, muscles weak, dependent on a nurse just to sit up. She would help, naturally, but Mr. Harwood had always relied on himself. He couldn't depend on a nurse's care forever. His condition was deteriorating, and he was desperately thirsty for water, nothing else. Mr. Harwood turned his head toward the closed door. The nurse wasn't likely to come soon. Understandably, she was always busy. He often heard the head nurse's voice behind the door. "Hey, when will you disinfect Ward 7? All talk and no action. And help the patient from 5th Ward. He needs to go for an ultrasound." Mr. Harwood knew they meant him, the patient in Ward 5, a 53-year-old businessman surrounded by mysterious sensors and wires. He'd seen similar equipment in movies' intensive care units, but since he was conscious and alert, this must be an ordinary ward. The room's stark whiteness made it difficult to open his eyes fully, but Mr. Harwood hardly cared. What difference would it make? None. A crushing weakness overwhelmed him anew, and Mr. Harwood sensed the end approaching. I wonder whom she reprimanded so harshly, he mused. The modest blonde, or the red-head with the difficult temperament? He didn't know most of the medical staff's names. He just knew one, Gillian, the kindest amongst them. She maintained impeccable politeness and never showed rudeness. However, the patients of the VIP ward were supposed to be well taken care of, so it was expectable. But not everyone behaved like that. Mr. Harwood had a good doctor. Dr. Doggett had been honest with him from day one. The situation is serious, but don't lose heart. We'll run more tests for a clearer picture. Meanwhile, stay positive, and try not to worry needlessly. Her candour had lifted his spirits. Perhaps the operation could help, he thought, though Annabeth doesn't believe in it, always insisting it's futile. Easy for her to say from outside. True, Annabeth visits, but not as often as she should. Maybe it's the weather. Autumn was in full swing, leaves falling and dancing in intricate patterns. Mr. Harwood reminisced about his morning jogs in the city park. The yellow leaves on the paths had looked so pristine that stepping on them made him uncomfortable. He wanted to preserve that magical golden pathway untouched. But it was just a dream. Soon enough a janitor would sweep it all away with a few strokes of his broom. In his hospital bed, Mr. Harwood pondered seemingly disconnected thoughts. How long since his son's death? Who would inherit his estate? Who would take over his business? Each question demanded, if not an answer, at least careful consideration. And time he wasn't sure he had. While the businessman contemplated his uncertain future, life continued in the hospital corridor nearby. Head nurse Dana demanded perfect order in everything, though, according to rumours, at the beginning of her career, she was not distinguished by special zeal. The main merit of Dana was her ability to make connections. She would wink at one rich patient, and then she would make up a required document or certificate for another. Well, of course everything was within reasonable limits in accordance with the law. Dana didn't want troubles. Close to the department head, she ruled over the nurses like a queen. She was particularly harsh with Gillian, a sweet, compliant girl who never resisted requests. No one knew why, likely just an instant dislike, common in female workplaces where everything from a hairstyle to a new dress could trigger antipathy. However, Gillian always behaved modestly, tried not to stand out from the crowd, wore simple clothes, and didn't use makeup. Her hair, the colour of ripe wheat, always smelled of herbs and something else. Gillian's partner, Sonia, pondered what this scent reminded her of until she realised it was like strawberries and wild flowers. Not roses, but the kind that grow near rivers, sustained by moisture throughout the summer. She must be using some clever balm or lotion. Look how fragrant it is. And here I buy all the expensive branded products with little effect. Sonia thought enviously, eyeing the young nurse's graceful figure. Truth be told, Sonia had no reason to complain. She was slender and beautiful, though her beauty seemed artificial, like a fashion doll's. Moreover, Sonia was cunning and often tried to push the hardest work onto her colleagues. Now, seizing a moment, she said, "Gillian, take the laundry to the neighbouring building." They mixed everything up again. Sonia's reasoning was simple. She disliked the weather outside, where drizzling rain fell and gusty winds threatened to knock people off their feet. Only janitor Mr. Gish bravely battled the fallen leaves, walking through puddles in his funny rubber overshoes. "All right, I'll handle it soon, but first I need to check on Mr. Harwood in the 5th ward. That businessman might need help." Gillian agreed. Sonia smiled contentedly. Go ahead then. I can't stand that money bag anyway. The way he looks at me makes my skin crawl. He's ill and barely leaves his room. What else can you expect? Gillian objected. Sonia shook her head, indicating she had no desire to discuss such an unpleasant subject. Gillian carefully opened the door and hesitated at the threshold. "Mr. Harwood, may I come in?" The patient noticeably brightened and answered softly, Of course, come in, Gillian. I'd like some water, but I lack the strength to get up. I've been waiting for a nurse, but no one came." Gillian felt embarrassed, having seen Dana in the corridor just 5 minutes ago. "They're busy with rounds coming up, so it's a bit hectic," Gillian replied diplomatically as she poured water from the cooler.
"Thank you, Gillian,"
Mr. Harwood said, his hand trembling as he reached for the glass. The orderly hesitated briefly before helping the exhausted man take a sip. Mr. Harwood felt ashamed of his helplessness, but there was nothing to be done. No one was immune to such circumstances. Yesterday healthy and fine, today unable to get out of bed or quench one's thirst. He looked at the nurse gratefully, tears glistening in his eyes. Gillian understood without words. Some things needed no explanation. She was about to leave when the patient lightly touched her hand.
"Gillian, do you have a minute? I need your help."
"Of course, I'd be happy to help. Can I get you anything? Should I call a doctor?" Mr. Harwood shook his head.
"No, something else. I want to ask you to help me make a will."
Gillian turned pale. "A will? What for? I don't know anything about that. Shouldn't you have a lawyer? I'm just an ordinary nurse." The businessman paused, gathering his strength.
"No, Gillian, I just need you to write down a simple plan from my words. I have a notebook in my nightstand. You can write everything there. Who gets what? I don't know what tomorrow brings. I've delayed this long enough. I'm afraid of causing trouble."
Gillian sighed with relief. "Well, if that's all, I don't mind. It's a bit awkward, but if it's necessary, why not?" Mr. Harwood watched her gratefully. A good girl, always busy like a bee, never resting. Meanwhile, Gillian retrieved a large notebook with tear-off sheets and a fountain pen from the nightstand. A photograph slipped out, a young man standing beside an expensive car. Gillian discreetly glanced at its back, noting the inscription, "From a loving son to a loving father." Embarrassed, she carefully tucked the photo into her notebook. Mr. Harwood closed his eyes, thinking,
where to begin?
This would be an unusual will. A month ago, he had opened several bank accounts containing substantial sums. They were intended for various people, some unconnected to each other, a friend working as a restaurant administrator, a long-retired schoolteacher, the cemetery caretaker who tended his accident victim son's grave. The late wife's monument needed attention too. The list was extensive, with amounts varying based on the significance of each deed or other factors. Mr. Harwood did not want to handle such accounting through a notary. Above all, he didn't want his young wife to learn the names of the people he mentioned. Annabeth would already inherit his most valuable possessions in the event of his passing: the business, a 2-story house outside the city, and an elite apartment in the centre with its magnificent city view. There was also his minor stepson Bruce, but Mr. Harwood had provided for him by opening a savings deposit in his name. By the businessman's calculations, when Bruce came of age, he would be quite wealthy and able to manage the money as he wished. Of course, Mr. Harwood could have asked the notary to do what he was asking Gillian to do, but who could guarantee secrecy? And knowing Annabeth's character, she would certainly make life difficult for those people whom her husband wished to thank in this unusual way. Mr. Harwood had just opened his mouth to tell the nurse the first name when the door of the ward burst open. The businessman looked up to see his wife, accompanied by a bespectacled man around 40, carrying a leather briefcase. Even a child could tell that she had brought a professional with her, likely their family lawyer. "Oh, hi, honey, how are you doing? How are you feeling?" Annabeth asked in an artificially concerned voice. Mr. Harwood was about to answer when his wife cut him off again. "And this is Mr. Blake, darling, notary. You mentioned wanting one, so I took the initiative." Mr. Harwood wrinkled his nose and cast an apologetic look at Gillian. The nurse nodded understandingly and returned the notebook to the nightstand. Annabeth smirked. "That's right, dear. Come back later." Gillian only smiled in response and quietly left the room. What else could she do? Annabeth was his legal wife and could do as she pleased. On the other hand, Gillian was grateful for her for interrupting because she was freed from the uncomfortable task of recording the heirs' names. It wasn't the difficulty that bothered her. She simply couldn't imagine this kind, sweet patient passing away. "Everything will be fine. Mr. Harwood's treatment is going well. Dr. Doggett is a heaven-sent doctor." Gillian reassured herself as she hurried to her next task, delivering laundry to the neighbouring building. Such mix-ups happened occasionally during busy times in their department. The air was crisp outside, typical for mid-October, with a cool wind and overcast skies hinting at the approaching winter. Though the heavy snows were still far off, townspeople had already started bundling up more at night. Mr. Gish, the janitor, seemed unbothered by the weather, standing with his broom like a sentry at his post. Seeing Gillian, he smiled. "Here comes Gillian. Let me help you, dear. That bundle's bigger than you are." "No need, Mr. Gish. I can manage. It's not far," Gillian replied. The janitor shrugged and resumed sweeping, gathering leaves into a pile to bag later for the garbage. Passing Mr. Gish's service space, Gillian heard odd sounds through the half-open door, what seemed like voices, then muffled music. Reading the question in her eyes, the janitor explained sheepishly, "It's a TV, Gillian. I got it from the guard for a few days, in exchange for my chess set." Gillian stared at the elderly man in surprise and set her laundry bundle on the bench. "I can't believe what I'm hearing, Mr. Gish. Didn't you say there was nothing worth watching on TV? Just tearful serials and music shows?" "Yes, I did, but I didn't get this thing for myself," the janitor admitted guiltily. "Then for whom?" The question caught Mr. Gish off guard. His expression showed he hesitated to explain. "I got it for the boy. Well, he's a stray who came to me. Oh, what an awful word. Like he's some stray dog." "Oh, Mr. Gish, he's not a stray. More like a homeless," Gillian corrected with a gentle smile. "That's it exactly, my dear. A homeless waif." I was racking my brain trying to find the right words, but couldn't manage it. You know how my memory fails me. Got knocked on the head once and I haven't been the same since. Gillian nodded as she remembered the story. Mr. Gish had come to their clinic 6 months ago with a closed head injury. He had worked as a watchman in a warehouse when, during a robbery, he was struck from behind. He ended up in intensive care with no family to visit him and spent a month in a coma. Keeping someone on life support is both troublesome and costly. The employer had immediately fired Mr. Gish retroactively, claiming they didn't know why he was in the warehouse. When they discovered his suspended criminal record, they dismissed the case entirely, suggesting perhaps he was scouting the place to rob it, or his accomplices had turned on him. Who needs an extra mouth? Mr. Gish's situation was critical. For several days he balanced between life and death. His heart even stopped once, but they managed to resuscitate him. Fortunately, after 6 months, Mr. Gish emerged from the coma, underwent rehabilitation and gradually recovered. When he learned the clinic needed a janitor, Mr. Gish begged for this position and was hired. "Now I protect different treasures, natural ones, trees and bushes. They repay me with golden leaves. Is that not wealth? Mr. Gish said with a smile, leaning on his shovel. Gillian knew he had always been lonely, and now he had taken in a street boy. Tommy's over there watching cartoons. Such a wise boy, only 7, but he reasons like an adult. He helped me clean up the leaves the other day, can you imagine? Worth his weight in gold, that child, Mr. Gish explained when Gillian came to the door. She quietly turned the handle and stepped over the threshold. Warmth and comfort enveloped her. Mr. Gish was skilled in maintaining his space. A young boy sat by a small TV on an old sofa. When he heard the door creak, he turned and met the guest's eyes. At the sight of her uniform, he tensed like a frightened wild animal. "Don't be afraid, Tommy, it's Gillian. She's kind and won't turn you into anyone." The boy nodded and smiled. "Hi, buddy. How do you like the cartoons?" she asked gently. "They're good, but I prefer watching superheroes," the boy replied softly. Gillian smiled mysteriously. "I know them well. Tell me, would you like to become one of them?" Tommy looked surprised. "Is that possible? Of course I want to." Gillian laughed, then added, "But if you want to become strong, you need to eat well. You're so thin." Tommy lowered his eyes. "I'm not thin. I'm just growing in the sky direction." Gillian smiled. "All right, don't worry. I'll take the laundry and run to the store. Just wait here, okay? Don't leave." "All right, Gillian. I'll wait," the boy answered. Meanwhile, Mr. Harwood, fighting through his pain, was discussing his will with his young wife. "Darling, you understand, don't you? We shouldn't delay this. A will is an official document. It would give me and my son peace of mind," Annabeth declared, unbothered by the notary's presence. Mr. Harwood's face turned pale as snow. "I remember everything, Annabeth. Of course I do. I just wanted to collect my thoughts and make a rough plan." "Oh, is that all? You could have said so earlier. Here, I've been running around worried like a fool," she said, pursing her lips resentfully. Mr. Blake, the notary, present for the conversation, coughed discreetly, suggesting they should proceed with business. "Darling, let's handle the business matters first. The house isn't going anywhere. It'll be Bruce's family home when he grows up. But the car dealership and specialised workshops need your attention now," Annabeth persisted. Yet the businessman hesitated about making his will. Initially, he wanted to cite weakness and poor health, but Annabeth was really insisting, and her arguments were compelling. "Mr. Harwood, this isn't just for me. Do you want competitors taking over the business? They're not wasting any time, you know." The sick man nodded wearily. "Fine, I'll sign it. But that's all for today, agreed? The real estate and car can wait, okay?" Annabeth's eyes brightened. "Of course, honey. Whatever you say. Just sign right here and here. That's all." Mr. Harwood, with a weakening hand, signed the document and leaned back on the pillow with relief. His head was spinning, and his throat felt as dry as if he had walked through a scorching desert for hours. For Annabeth, however, it was a moment of triumph. When she left her husband's room, she gave the head nurse an approving look and slammed the door behind her. Joyfully waving her elegant handbag, she headed for her car in the parking lot. The notary followed obediently like a puppet on strings. Such compliance usually stemmed from either fear or an impressive sum of money. In this case, the latter, because Annabeth had long been preparing to force her husband to make a will. Being older, Mr. Harwood understood his wife's interest. After all, who wouldn't want to inherit a business that brought stable income? And Annabeth had succeeded, aided by favourable circumstances, namely the death of Mr. Harwood's son Mitch several years ago. Annabeth had never known Mitch personally, seeing him only in photographs. According to her husband, his son had lived life to the fullest, actively pursuing sports, skydiving, and following a vegetarian diet. But Mitch's greatest passion was fast driving, not in the city streets, but on open highways, where the wind against the windshield made his heart race with adrenaline. Mr. Harwood had begged his son not to take unnecessary risks. But for Mitch, risk was like salt to food, essential. When Mr. Harwood urged him to think about starting a family, Mitch would dismiss it. "I'll get there, Dad. What's the hurry? I haven't had my fill of life yet. When I settle down, then I'll start a family." Mr. Harwood would just shake his head. What could he say? His son was an adult who would make his own choices. For Mitch's birthday, the businessman gave him a new car, an exclusive model, unlike his son had owned before. Despite appreciating the gift, Mitch still fought with his father that night. Mr. Harwood had raised the boy alone after his mother's death when Mitch was 3. Though he knew he couldn't provide all the warmth and attention his son craved, he had ensured Mitch had the best nannies and tutors for a proper upbringing and education. But somewhere, the businessman's careful plan developed a crack. Mitch grew increasingly independent, which ultimately shaped his character. The final argument erupted unexpected. Mitch, quick to anger, accused his father of the indifference that had driven to death his mother. These words left Mr. Harwood breathless. Like any father, he had dreamed his son would become his pride and support, but everything had turned out differently. Tears welled in Mr. Harwood's eyes as his son slammed the door and stormed out. Mitch got behind the wheel of his new car and gunned the engine. An hour later, Mr. Harwood learned from the news that his son had died after driving off a bridge into the river. The body wasn't found initially, and Mr. Harwood clung to hope that his son had survived. But search teams and divers shook their heads grimly, saying survival was impossible. Mr. Harwood held on to his faith and hope until Mitch was found. The river had carried his body downstream, where local fishermen discovered it. Even then, Mr. Harwood insisted it must be a mistake. Surely the investigation was wrong. It couldn't be his son. No, no, no. But when the businessman went to the morgue for identification, reality crashed down. There lay Mitch, looking just as he had in life. Mr. Harwood's tears told the pathologist all he needed to know. 8 years had passed since then, and Mr. Harwood had begun living with Annabeth only 4 years ago. What did he have to lose? Continue living alone into old age? Who would care for him then? Who would offer comfort and kind words? So Annabeth entered Mr. Harwood's life, a seemingly sweet, kind woman raising her son Bruce alone. Initially, she appeared genuine, honest, beautiful, faithful. Mr. Harwood had always known how to court elegantly, surrounding his chosen one with attention and care from the start. Pleasant surprises, expensive gifts, and enormous bouquets of roses created a daily whirlwind of luxury and affection. Such devotion was difficult to resist. Colleagues and business partners unanimously urged Mr. Harwood to draft a prenuptial agreement. The businessman would nod in agreement, only to lose himself in his woman's green eyes. His acquaintances could only shake their heads, seeing the couple's fate sealed by their 17-year age gap. Mr. Harwood understood friction would arise, as their differing viewpoints had already surfaced. Arguments frequently centred on the strained relationship between Mr. Harwood and his stepson Bruce, who inexplicably avoided his stepfather as if fearing harm from him. After the wedding, Annabeth transformed too, growing imperious and arrogant. Initially, Mr. Harwood had found this change intriguing, but when he discovered signs of a serious illness, he realised his mistake. Then again, his life hadn't been particularly joyful before. Endless work and mental strain, all to amass wealth and achieve financial independence. And now what? The time had come, and he didn't know what to do with the money. Sighing sadly, Mr. Harwood struggled to reach the nightstand, to take out a notebook and make the necessary notes himself. What if he didn't have time? The doctor had assured him there was still time, but it was better to be prepared, to stay one step ahead, especially since sleep would be impossible anyway. Annabeth, on the other hand, was ecstatic. It was no small feat. She had succeeded beyond belief. Her stubborn husband had finally made a will, which meant she could share the news with her closest confidant, the man who had been replacing her husband for months. After dropping the lawyer at the notary's office, she pulled out her cell phone and dialed the number she knew by heart. "Hello, honey. You can congratulate me, Tom. Yes, I'm the rightful heiress. True, it's only on paper for now, but it's just a matter of time. My hubby has his operation tomorrow. I've talked to the right person and found out all the ins and outs." "Who?" "The head nurse. She says my husband is doomed. He's a vegetable. Even if he survives, he won't be able to run the business because most likely he'll be incapacitated." Chuck snorted triumphantly and ended the call. It wasn't by chance he met this Annabeth. She's that kind of woman, ready for fire or flood, and most importantly, Chuck himself stays in the shadows while his mistress does all the work. She'll go to any length for her husband's inheritance. Meanwhile, Chuck had a more delicate task, taking over the Harwood family business. Annabeth had no idea her lover was actually an agent for a criminal group that specialized in seizing established businesses from vulnerable owners. Chuck's arsenal of tools was extensive, from anonymous letters and phone blackmail to arson and vehicle vandalism. Of course, any genuine relationship with Annabeth was out of the question. Chuck's plan was simple. She would inherit and give him partial control of the business shares. For an experienced womanizer with his background, it was trivial. If everything went smoothly, he'd receive his percentage from his employers. Then he could forget about Annabeth and her morose son like a bad dream. But Annabeth knew none of this, and continued making her grand plans of getting rich in the immediate future and enjoying her lover's embraces. Meanwhile, Gillian, after delivering laundry, went to the store as promised to buy treats for Tommy. The saleswoman greeted her with surprise. "Gillian, since when do you buy drinks and sweets? Usually only Sonia and a couple of nurses from your department come in. Don't misunderstand. I'm happy to help a good person. I'm just curious." Gillian smiled sheepishly. "They're not for me. They're for a little boy, about 7 years old. Mr. Gish took him in. He's watching cartoons in his room. He must be hungry. You know Mr. Gish doesn't have much money." The saleswoman nodded sympathetically. "I know, dear. Mr. Gish is a clever man. The yard became spotless as soon as he took over." Gillian sighed and studied the pastry in the display case. Soon she left the shop with a bag of fresh pastries, milk chocolate, and a carton of milkshake. Tommy waited impatiently. After handing the child his treats, Gillian winked at the janitor, suggesting they step outside for fresh air and talk. After a moment's hesitation, she asked that had bothered her since meeting the boy. "Listen, Mr. Gish, how did you meet Tommy? Did he have relatives in the hospital?" The janitor shifted uncomfortably, glanced around and spoke quietly. "Well, you see, Gillian, I've been secretly feeding the stray dogs behind the ambulance station garages. It started with Alf, a dog whose owner died in surgery. It was a hopeless case, but worth trying. Poor Alf grieved for 3 days, sitting and staring at the hospital windows. The nurses told me later that his master was moved 3 times between rooms before ending up in intensive care. In an entirely different building, mind you. Somehow that dog found his master's window every time. I don't know how he did it. He'd sit there for hours in the summer heat until he got heat stroke. Yes, dear, dogs get that too. The poor thing overheated, collapsed and started convulsing. I didn't think Alf would make it. I took him home, nursed him with broth, and saved him. While Alf was recovering, they buried his owner, and the dog has been my friend ever since." Gillian looked at Mr. Gish in bewilderment, still not understanding what could be the connection between the stray dog and Tommy. Having read the question in her eyes, he shook his head and continued,
"Don't be angry, my dear, that I started with Alf. Well, from afar, I mean. I can't tell a short story, no matter how hard I try. I'll try to keep it brief, Gillian. Alf started coming to me during my shifts. I can't take him to my place. I live in a hostel. Barely have enough space myself. Where else could I put the dog? The neighbours wouldn't understand. They'd get angry, and I don't need scandals, you know. So, Alf started coming to me here, but not alone."
"What do you mean, Mr. Gish?" Gillian couldn't help asking. Mr. Gish smiled.
"Well, just like that, my dear. He began bringing his vagabond friends. First Countess, a lame sheepdog, then Charlie, a great mongrel. He could eat a whole loaf of bread in one sitting. And then there's Bagel and Jack. All in all, a small pack. I can't feed them bones and meat trimmings every day. Such a feast comes once a week, not more often. I dry breadcrumbs for them and boil porridge on my hot stove. You should see how they gobble it up. In no time the bowls are empty and don't need washing. They even shine like new. Recently I went out to feed the dogs some breadcrumbs. I gave one his portion, when suddenly I heard a child's voice, thin and pitiful. 'Give me a breadcrumb, uncle?' I jumped in surprise. There was a little boy standing among the dogs, like Mowgli. God forbid. So I took him by the hand to my service place where it's warm. That's how I met Tommy. And now I don't know what to do."
At this point the old man deliberately paused to let Gillian process what he had said. "What a story!" Gillian exclaimed, and then asked, "But what about his parents? Father, mother, or grandmother? Isn't anyone alive?" The elderly janitor glanced anxiously at the building door before saying,
"Tommy says he barely remembers his mother, true or not, but she died in childbirth. He lives with his stepfather, an alcoholic who drinks away the boy's allowance, leaving his stepson hungry. That's why Tommy avoids home, to not see his stepfather."
Gillian's cheeks flushed with indignation. "How can this be? There are services for this, social workers, child protection. We should report this scoundrel to the authorities and make his life miserable. This is outrageous. A boy begging for food in the street, while some thug lives off his allowance." Mr. Gish nodded in agreement.
"You're right, my dear. I'll help you if needed. I won't stand aside, but we'll need time for the proceedings. Where will he live meanwhile? I can't take him in."
Gillian pondered briefly, though the decision came instantly. "Let him stay with me for now. My house is small, but it's warm and dry. He can stay with you until the end of your shift, all right?" Mr. Gish looked at the nurse gratefully.
"Thank you, Sunshine. I'll be forever grateful."
Gillian smiled and hurried to the clinic, noticing that the head nurse was watching her closely from the window. The moment she opened the door, her boss confronted her.
"Where have you been, Gillian? You went for laundry and disappeared. Stop these games. I won't tolerate it. If you don't want to work, just say so, instead of standing there making eyes at our janitor."
Gillian's indignation left her breathless.
"How can you say that? What eyes?" Dana sneered. "The same ones you made at that businessman? What do they see in you?"
"I don't understand what you're implying, Dana," Gillian mumbled, embarrassed.
The head nurse regarded her subordinate with obvious disapproval. "Oh, she doesn't understand. That businessman took ill after you left, but he left you a note. He was practically choking as he handed it to me, saying, 'Give this to Gillian, I beg you.' I can barely understand it. What a disgrace and unprofessional behaviour, Gillian."
A question formed in Gillian's eyes. "The note, where is it?" "Did Mr. Harwood leave it for me?" Gillian asked, overcoming her natural shyness.
Dana wrinkled her nose. "You're so tiresome, Gillian. Do you think I'd bother keeping those scribbles? I threw it in the trash. Nothing important. If you must, go look for it yourself, and stop frowning. Come to work on time, and you won't have to dig through garbage."
"How is Mr. Harwood now? Is he feeling better?"
Gillian redirected the conversation.
better. Gillian, are you even listening? I told you he felt worse, and after Dr. Doggett examined him, she sent him to surgery. Well, she knows best. She's the doctor after all, the head nurse said with arrogance. Realising that the conversation was over, Gillian went to the ward and began her usual routine work. The thought that Dana had thrown the note into the waste basket wouldn't leave her mind. My God, why did she do that? Couldn't she have handed it directly to me? Though, what's to be surprised about? She doesn't care about me. She even hates me, Gillian thought while mopping the floor. At that moment, she realised that Mr. Harwood had left the note for a reason, and she had to find it at all costs. But which wastebasket had Dana thrown the crumpled sheet into? Deciding to search the garbage can next to the head nurse's room first, Gillian stealthily began her inspection. And while she was doing this, the head nurse was furtively watching her through the crack in the door, smiling smugly. I really fooled that simpleton. Did I read the note? Of course I did. I studied it immediately and sent it to Annabeth in a message. You think I get money from her regularly and keep an eye on her husband's condition for nothing? Meanwhile, Gillian, unaware of all this, diligently searched all the garbage cans but found nothing. The truth was that Dana had burned the piece of paper containing the safe deposit box code. When Annabeth got the message with cherished numbers, she felt joyful excitement. Now that's something. What an old fool! He's standing at death's door himself, but still playing with codes like a spy. Did you think I didn't know about that, nurse? But I do, you old miser. The news of the secret safe deposit box delighted her lover Chuck too. What a nice bonus on top of my fee. We'll split everything and then I disappear. Thank you for your attention and love, Annabeth. This has been quite an adventure, thought the young scoundrel on his way to the bank. Annabeth wanted to shout her triumph to the world. There must be a fortune inside this bank deposit box, perhaps even jewellery. Ah, how it's wonderful to be the lucky one. When Annabeth arrived at the bank, introducing Chuck as her bodyguard, the bank clerk graciously accepted the woman's request and offered to escort them to the vault personally. Mr. Skinner, do you have a bag for the money? We can't exactly walk around with millions in plain sight, can we? Annabeth asked with a soft giggle. The banker raised an eyebrow. We can arrange that if necessary. We can even provide a car and security guard. It's all included in the service for our deposit box holders. The journey to the safe deposit vault seemed endless to Annabeth. Stairs, turns, doors, and more stairs. Finally they arrived. Mr. Skinner verified the information and, after a brief pause, placed an oblong box made of fireproof steel before them. Is that all? Chuck blurted out, trying to guess by sight how much money the makeshift box might contain. Well, yes. What else have you been waiting for? The banker wondered. No, that's fine. Just open it quickly, Annabeth said impatiently. Mr. Skinner smiled knowingly. It opens quite simply by removing the lid, just like a regular jewellery box, only without hinges or clasps. Shall I step out? That's the protocol. Chuck lunged for the box and, nearly breaking his fingernails, threw off the lid. The lovers peered inside eagerly, barely suppressing their shocked gasps. The box was empty, or nearly empty, save for a heavy paper envelope at the bottom. He must have put a bank card in there, probably unlimited or something, Annabeth whispered as she tore open the envelope. But there were no bank cards or account details inside. Instead, the envelope contained Mr. Harwood's torn will and a crumpled piece of paper with a boldly drawn middle finger, that universally understood gesture that needed no explanation. A heavy silence fell over the room until the clerk politely asked, Will you be requiring that car with security? Annabeth shot him a venomous look before breaking into sobs. Once again, her cunning, far-sighted husband had outmanoeuvred her. Having calculated everything in advance, Mr. Harwood played on the greed of the head nurse, who would surely pass the note to his unfaithful wife. The businessman had long suspected Annabeth's infidelity, but lacked concrete evidence. When she began insisting on drawing up a will during his illness, everything became clear. Now, lying on the operating table, he drifted gently into sleep under the carefully measured dose of anaesthesia. Meanwhile, Gillian, unaware of all this, had firmly resolved to adopt Tommy at any cost. That evening she visited the boy's stepfather, but he merely laughed, revelling in his power. Tears glistened in Gillian's eyes. What could she do against this burly, tattooed man? Tommy's cries for help went unanswered, as neighbours hid in their homes, fearing retaliation.
"Had enough? Now get out of here,"
growled the villain. What the brute hadn't counted on was faithful Alf and his pack following Gillian and their new friend. The Charlie, the Countess, and a dozen angry dogs quickly turned to the tables, chasing the wretch up a tree with skilled paws and other means best left unmentioned. After dealing with the offender, the dogs rushed to shower the boy with affectionate licks. "Stop! Stop! It tickles!" Tommy laughed joyfully. Just then a photograph slipped from his jacket's left pocket. Gillian picked it up and froze. It showed a pleasant-looking young man in his 20s, standing before a luxury car. His face seemed oddly familiar. "That's my daddy. I found that picture in Mum's belongings," Tommy explained, noticing Gillian's surprised look. Gillian gasped as recognition struck. "I've seen this in Mr. Harwood's notebook. Could this be Mitch Harwood, Tommy's real father?" she wondered. The answer wouldn't come that evening, nor even that week. The entire truth took a month to unravel, revealing many surprises along the way. Mitch Harwood had been involved with Julia, an orphan, shortly before his death in a car accident. She discovered her pregnancy only after his death. Without knowing his family, Julia resolved to raise the child alone, but life proved harsher than the naive orphanage graduate had imagined. Fate led her to David, another former orphanage resident who had graduated 3 years earlier. Believing his persuading and lies, she agreed to let him be her son's father. The rest is known. Julia died in childbirth, leaving her son with only a photo of his father. Mr. Hayward lay weeping on the couch as he beheld the miniature version of his son, holding Nurse Gillian's hand. The private detective, clutching his investigation files, stood awkwardly aside. Annabeth and her lover, Chuck's timely exposure, left them destitute. Overnight, they lost their support, jobs, and influential connections. But for the once doomed businessman, everything changed. The successful operation and finding his grandson kindled new hope on his horizon, giving him fresh energy and motivation. "Welcome, my grandson. We'll never be apart again," he whispered through tears to Tommy. Gillian stepped aside shyly, where Private Detective Michael took her hand with meaningful intent. Their close collaboration during the investigation had blossomed into mutual attraction. Mr. Hayward smiled at the pair. "Well, my dears, will you let this old man dance at your wedding, or am I already past my prime?" The young nurse giggled shyly, giving her fiancé his cue. "Of course you'll dance, Mr. Harwood. And what old man are you? You've got your whole life ahead. This is just the beginning," Michael replied eagerly. The businessman smiled fondly at Gillian, whom he'd come to see as a daughter. How could it be otherwise? Through her help, he had found the grandson he'd longed for all these years.